Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. What if Naruto got legendary 3 elemental Pokemon from Ninja Scroll? Movie 1. Naruto wiped his brow, finally done learning the Shadow Clone Jutsu, glad that the third had decided to go along with Naruto's idea and use this opportunity to catch a traitor. And if all went as planned, Naruto would be an official genin afterwards. The fact that the third had suggested taking a look at the first 3 things in the scroll just added icing to the cake in his opinion. Naruto had always been terrible at the clone jutsu. Finally finding one that he could not only do but seemed to excel at really made his day. Add the facts that not only were they solid and could perform jutsu but also that the owner got the memories from them when they dispelled, and you had one happy camper. Alright, let's see what we've got next. Naruto thought as he sat down and looked at the scroll again. Seeing a storage seal next, he paused wondering what could be so bad that it would be sealed inside the forbidden scroll. The third had recommended taking a look though, so Naruto shrugged and pumped chakra into the seal. The seal flared before 3 small balls that were red on top and white on bottom with hinges on one side and a button on the other, as well as a weird red rectangular device popped out. A note appeared as well. Deciding to play things safe on this one, Naruto reached over to the note and read. If you are reading this, then you have accepted the challenge that I could not meet. The 3 balls that have left the seal contain creatures called Pokemon. I found these 3 along with the device, which I have learned is called a Pokédex, in some ruins in the mountains of the Land of Fire. From what we and the archaeologists that were with my team have uncovered, they are the last of their kind in this world. They are said to have powers that are similar and in many ways stronger than those of Shinobi. However, none of us could summon them. All of us failed the test given to us to summon them. Perhaps you will have better luck. Simply place your hands on the Pokédex and it will test you. Good luck. Minato Namikaze. Naruto's eyebrow had raised as he read about the creatures in the note, but his eyes shot wide open at the name at the end. Holy, not even the 4th could pass the test. Still, I might as well try. The old man obviously thought I had a chance to pass this test whatever it is, and it can't hurt to try, right? With that thought, Naruto placed his hand on the Pokédex. All of a sudden, Naruto's life flashed before his eyes as he relived everything in a little less than a minute, making him dizzy from the vision of his life going by at a blur. The Pokédex then beeped, causing Naruto to drop it. When the Pokédex hit the ground, it flipped open and a voice came from it. You have endured many hardships and still came out strong. You have passed my test and earned the right to be called trainer. Right after the Pokédex spoke, the 3 Pokeballs glowed a golden color before they expanded into hand-sized orbs and opened on their hinges, releasing a red beam of light from each ball. The beams turned towards the ground and changed shapes once they hit. When they did, the red light faded away, leaving 3 small creatures that had not been seen in the world for a long time. The first one was standing on all 4 legs and was a light bluish green with a green bulb on its back. The next one looked like an orange lizard that stood on its hind legs with a flame on its tail. The third one looked like a blue turtle with a yellow and brown shell that also stood on its hind legs. As soon as they were visible, the Pokédex began talking again. Bulbasaur. Pokemon type. Seed. For some time after its birth, it grows by gaining nourishment from the seed on its back. Charmander. Pokemon type. Lizard. The fire on the tip of its tail is a measure of its life. If healthy, its tail burns brightly. Squirtle. Pokemon type. Tiny turtle. It shelters itself inside its shell, then strikes back with spouts of water at every opportunity. As the Pokédex spoke, a picture of each said Pokemon was visible on its screen. As this was going on, the Pokemon were looking around. The Bulbasaur cocked its head and said, Bulbasaur, soar. The Squirtle looked around some more before saying, Skier, Squirtle. The Charmander spotted Naruto and its eyes widened before it pointed at him and said, Charmander. Charmander. Naruto rose an eyebrow as all 3 Pokemon were now looking at him. Okay, why are you guys just saying your names? He asked, trying to figure out these weird creatures. It was actually the Pokédex that answered. Pokemon are incapable of human speech. They rely on a language that is based off of the species name and uses accents on certain parts of the word to form different meanings. Naruto got a WTF look on his face before he shook it away and simply decided that that little info belonged with the rest of the insane stuff that was currently going on. Looking at the three who were still looking curiously at the blonde, he looked back at the Pokédex and asked it if it had any more information on them. 2 hours later, Naruto was looking at the third entry in the Forbidden Scroll when his watch went off. Naruto took a quick glance at it and shut the alarm off before he rolled the scroll close and put it on his back. He then recalled his new Pokémon who had been laying underneath some trees as Naruto read the scroll. I'll have to try the exploding clone jutsu some other time. Now all I have to do is wait for Mizuki to come and I can bust his rear end with the shadow clone jutsu. I had wondered why the old man didn't have Anbu come with me. Old geezer must have known that I would be able to use it so well. Naruto was brought out of his thoughts when someone landed in front of him and said, "There you are, Naruto. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you're in?" Naruto's eyes widened as he recognized his teacher Iruka. Oh crap, no one else was supposed to be here. He thought before he said, "Iruka-sensei, you need to leave, now." Iruka was about to berate his student when the words said student had said and the tone of voice he used finally took root in his mind. "What do you mean?" he asked before both heard the sound of metal flying through the air. "Look out," Iruka shouted while he pushed Naruto out of the way and got pinned to the nearby shed by multiple kunai in the process. Hearing the sound of laughter, Naruto looked along the kunai flight path and saw Mizuki on a tree branch. There he is, Naruto thought with narrowed eyes. I must say, Iruka, I'm impressed. I didn't expect you to find him before I did, Mizuki said as he smirked at how helpless Iruka looked before turning to Naruto and said, "Naruto, give me the scroll, and I'll pass you." "No Naruto, don't do it. Mizuki is just trying to trick you," Iruka shouted from his position. "No duh," Naruto thought, but before he could say anything, Mizuki laughed and said, "I'm not trying to trick him, Iruka. No more than the rest of the village is anyway." Iruka's eyes widened as Naruto's narrowed before he said, "What do you mean?" Mizuki gave a mad-looking grin and said, "Do you want to know why the village hates you, Naruto?" Iruka began struggling and shouted out, "No Mizuki, you mustn't. It's forbidden." Mizuki smirked and said, "The reason why the village hates you is a secret that the third Hokage made 12 years ago on the night the Kyuubi attacked. A secret punishable by death if the adults of this village told their children. You see, the fourth didn't kill the Kyuubi. He sealed it into a baby whose umbilical cord had just been cut." Naruto's eyes widened slightly before narrowing again. "That's right, Naruto. You were that baby. You're the Kyuubi, the nine-tailed fox. Which is why you'll never be recognized and never become Hokage." Mizuki began laughing again. Iruka was about to say something but he never got the chance. "Is that it?" Both Chunin looked at Naruto who had a raised eyebrow looking at Mizuki like he was an idiot. Mizuki was wondering why Naruto wasn't an emotional wreck while Iruka was trying to figure out how his favorite student could be so calm while facing a Chunin. Naruto shook his head and said, "I knew you were a traitor, Mizuki, but I didn't think you were an idiot as well." Pulling out one of the Pokeballs from his pocket, he held it up and said, "I am no more the Kyuubi than this Pokeball is a Bulbasaur." Mizuki and Iruka looked confused at this and Mizuki said, "I have no idea what you are talking about, you demon brat, and I don't care. Once I kill you, I'll be seen as a hero." Naruto smirked and said, "Not likely. You know what, I was going to simply use the shadow clone jutsu that I learned from the scroll to bring you down for the old man, but I think I'll let one of my new Pokemon have a shot at you." Naruto pushed the button on the Pokeball on his hand. The ball enlarged itself, causing the two Chunin's eyes wide. Naruto then threw the ball and said, "Go, Bulbasaur." The ball hit the ground and released the grass Pokemon. Iruka and Mizuki stared at the Pokemon before Mizuki laughed and said, "Ha! What the hell is that thing? What in the world can that thing do? You know what, I think I'll just kill it as well as you." Mizuki took a demon shuriken off of his back and began twirling it before throwing it, earning a shout from Iruka telling Naruto to get out of the way. Thinking fast, Naruto called out, "Bulbasaur. Razor Leaf." The grass Pokemon gave out a shout as it launched its attack. 2 leaves shot out of its bulb and intercepted the shuriken before cutting straight through it, making the two Chunin's eyes widen again. The leaves kept going and Mizuki was forced to jump from his perch to the ground in order to avoid them. As he did, the three pieces of the shuriken, their paths altered slightly by the passage of the leaves, passed by either side and above Naruto before slamming into the ground behind him. Neither Mizuki or Iruka had time to notice this though, since as soon as Mizuki hit the ground Naruto called out, "Leech Seed." Bulbasaur leaned forward and pointed its bulb towards Mizuki before firing a seed out of it. Mizuki was unable to dodge in time and the bulb hit him before vines came out and wrapped around him. The vines then began glowing red and Mizuki began screaming before dropping unconscious 10 seconds later. The vines then retracted and the seed dropped off of the traitor's body. Bulbasaur walked over to the seed that had dropped off of the traitor and touched the seed with its foot. To everyone's surprise, including Naruto's, the seed glowed before being absorbed. Naruto rose an eyebrow and thought, "Didn't expect that." Before he said, "Great job, Bulbasaur." Said Pokemon smirked and nodded before walking back to Naruto, who held up the Pokeball and said, "Bulbasaur, return." The Pokeball opened a little before a red beam of light hit Bulbasaur and drew it back into the ball. As soon as the ball closed again, Naruto put it back into his pocket and turned around and ran over to Iruka and began taking out the kunai. As he was doing this, Iruka said, "Naruto, what was that thing?" Naruto looked up from the last kunai that he had just taken out from Iruka's pant leg and said, "A Pokemon." "A what?" Iruka said, trying to figure out what that word even meant. "It's something I found in the Forbidden Scroll that the old man told me to look at while I waited to catch Mizuki." Iruka let those words sink into his mind before his eyes widened and he said, "The Hokage told you to steal the scroll." Naruto stood up from his crouching position and nodded. Seeing his favorite teacher's look of confusion and shock, he said, "Come on, I'd rather explain this only once." He turned and walked over to Mizuki and picked him up in a fireman's lift and began walking back to the village to give his report to the Hokage. Iruka shook himself before taking off after his student. As he did, what Naruto had said a short time ago finally registered. Turning to Naruto, he said, "Naruto, did you say earlier that you learned the Shadow Clone Jutsu?" Naruto nodded and Iruka simply shook his head, deciding to save his questions until they talked to the Hokage. Sarutobi looked up from his crystal ball as Naruto and Iruka entered his office. Smiling, he said, "I saw you were able to pass the test. I had a feeling you would." Naruto nodded before dumping the still unconscious Mizuki haphazardly on the couch that was in the office before he unslung the scroll from his back and placed it on his leader's desk. Sarutobi picked up the scroll and put it behind one of the Hokage's pictures inside a hidden safe before going back to his seat and said, "Now then, why don't you explain what happened tonight to Iruka, Naruto?" Naruto nodded and sat down in one of the chairs and said, "You're going to want to sit down as well, Iruka-sensei. This could take a while." Iruka looked hesitant before taking the other chair. Once he was sitting, Naruto began talking, explaining to his teacher what happened earlier that day. "Today after graduation, I was approached by Mizuki, who told me of a way I could graduate. Thinking that it might be like that Rock Lee kid I heard about who graduated last year with the old man's permission, since it was found he couldn't use chakra outside of his body, I asked him how. He told me that to pass, I had to slip into the Hokage Tower and steal a scroll that would be marked forbidden. I decided to play along and told him I would do it. After he told me where and when to meet him, I went straight to the old man and told him about what Mizuki had told me. The old man wanted to just grab the traitor and send him to Ibiki, but I asked permission to go through with it and catch him in the act. The old man agreed and told me to look at the first 3 entries on the scroll, since he said that they should be able to be of use to me." Iruka's eyes widened as Naruto continued. "The first entry was the Shadow Clone, which I must admit seems to have been custom made for me, since I can literally make an army of them and not break a sweat." Iruka's eyes went bug-eyed when Naruto said that. "The third entry was the Exploding Shadow Clone. I haven't actually had a chance to try it out yet, but I'm going to as soon as I get the chance. But those two aren't the real kickers. The real show stealer was the second entry. It was a storage seal that contained 3 balls, and a device as well as a note written by the fourth himself." Naruto pulled out his 3 Pokeballs and the Pokédex. Pressing the button on the 3 balls, they grew hand-sized before Naruto pushed the buttons again, causing them to open and for his Pokemon to appear in beams of red light. As Iruka stared at the creatures, they looked around the office while Naruto continued. These guys are Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. They're called Pokemon, and are apparently the only ones left in the world. The device in my hand is called a Pokédex and is what tested me to see if I would be their trainer. It's basically an encyclopedia on the different Pokemon that used to exist. You would not believe what some of them looked like. Naruto then explained what the Pokédex had told him about his own Pokemon. Once he was done, Sarutobi lit his pipe with a small fire jutsu and said, "Now then, on to other matters, namely what Mizuki told you, Naruto. I'm glad to see you're handling the knowledge of your prisoner so well." Naruto shrugged and said, "While it does explain how I've been treated, that knowledge doesn't change who I am. I was Naruto Uzumaki before I learned about the Big Fuzz Ball, and I'm still Naruto Uzumaki now. The only difference is that I can add the title Jinchuriki to my title of Pokemon Trainer if I want to." Sarutobi nodded and said, "I see. Well then, there's one last thing that I have to do before you can leave, Naruto." Opening a drawer in his desk, Sarutobi pulled out a leaf headband before standing and handing it to Naruto. "Welcome to the ranks of the Hidden Leaf Shinobi, Naruto. And remember, if you ever need anything, just ask." Iruka put a hand on Naruto's shoulder and said, "The same goes for me, Naruto." Naruto nodded before he said, "Thanks guys. Actually, old man, there is a couple of things. I need a place to be able to train my Pokemon where no one else will notice, since it could get pretty destructive. Also, I need a way to feed these guys since my orphan stipend won't be able to keep all four of us fed even if it didn't no longer apply to me since I'm now a genin." Sarutobi frowned and said, "That's true, Naruto. I hadn't realized that you would have more mouths to feed. My apologies. I'll set up another stipend for you so that you can buy whatever you need for them. There's actually a fund for shinobi to take care of their partners that is made just for that purpose. As for a training area, I recommend using the woods behind the Hokage monument since most people don't go there often and there is an actual training area there that is no longer used. That should work until your team's assigned a training ground." Naruto nodded and thanked the man as he tied his headband to his head before he recalled his Pokemon and exited the office. Scene change. Hokage Monument. The next morning, Naruto stared out over the village from where he stood on the fort's head. It wasn't but a couple of days ago when he had painted and then cleaned this very monument to the village leaders. But now, Naruto could no longer afford to wear the mask of the happy-go-lucky prankster. He was a shinobi of his village now and playtime was officially over. This was made apparent by Naruto's change of clothing. Gone was his Kill Me orange jumpsuit. In its place were a pair of blue shinobi pants that were taped at his ankles and a dark blue short-sleeved ninja shirt under a dark green vest. Attached to a belt going around Naruto's waist was his kunai pouch on with his Pokeballs clipped to the belt next it. Naruto stared at the village for another minute before turning around and began walking into the woods. He soon came across the training field that the old man had told him about. True to his word, the place looked like it hadn't been tended to in years. The grass was up to Naruto's knees and there were even a few trees beginning to grow in the small field. The training logs looked like they needed to be replaced as well. As he looked around, Naruto thought, "It could use some work, but I don't think the guys would mind giving me a hand with it." Unclipping his Pokeballs from his belt, he held the three in between his fingers before pushing their buttons and throwing them in the air where they expanded and released their residents before returning to Naruto. The three released Pokemon looked around as Naruto returned the balls to his belt and said, "All right guys, for the next week this is going to be where we are going to be training. As you can see, it needs a bit of work getting it back in shape. We'll use some of your attacks to give me and my clones a hand in clearing the area. So, you guys ready to get started?" The three nodded and Naruto began directing them in using their powers to prepare the area that they would be training in for the next week. Time skip. Day before Genin orientation scene, Ninja Registration Office. Sarutobi looked over one of his new shinobi's picture. It displayed the blonde with a calm look in his eye as he looked at the camera with a small smirk. He nodded his approval and stamped approved on the form that the picture was stapled to and placed it with the other registration forms. He then looked over to another picture that Naruto had handed to him that showed him kneeling down on the roof of the Hokage Tower with his Pokemon in front of him. All four were wearing smiles and Naruto had his hands on Squirtle and Charmander's shoulders with Bulbasaur between the two. Like their trainer, all three Pokémon had headbands. They were different from their trainer in that theirs did not have a metal plate on them, instead having the leaf symbol painted in black on the dark green cloth. Sarutobi handed the picture back to Naruto, who put it back in his vest and asked, "How has training been?" Naruto smiled and said, "Quite well actually. I've been able to really improve my chakra control thanks to the Shadow Clone Jutsu. I'm still having a bit of trouble with the Exploding Clone Jutsu, but that's just because you have to learn how much chakra needs to go into them for the explosion you want. The little guys have been doing real well as well. They can already properly use 2 of their secondary attacks each." Seeing the confusion on his leader's face, he explained. Like Shinobi, Pokémon can't just use a move automatically the first time they try. They have to learn how to properly do the technique. There were some techniques that could be learned instantly from machines called technical machines. Dex said that it can replicate them but wants me to hold off on those until they learn a few more moves. Anyway, unlike Shinobi, when Pokémon are born, they already can do 4 attacks, called their primary attacks, properly. The attacks that they learn to do later through training are called secondary attacks. These are usually the moves they will rely on the most as the Pokémon become stronger, and eventually evolve, although some of the primary attacks are used just as much if they are effective enough. Sarutobi nodded and said, "I see." It was obvious to Naruto that he wanted to say more, but before he could, a boy threw the door open and charged toward the old man with a shuriken in his hand, declaring his imminent victory before promptly tripping on his scarf, sending him crashing into the ground. Naruto fell off his seat in laughter as the old leader placed his face in his hand. He may have pretty much given up pranking except against those who deserved it, but that was just hilarious in his opinion. The kid got up rubbing his face and said, "Ow. What happened?" He then noticed Naruto, who was now chuckling as he got back in his seat. Narrowing his eyes in anger, he went over to Naruto and said, You tripped me. Admit it." Naruto snorted and said, "I didn't trip you, kid, you did it yourself." The kid growled and tried punching Naruto with a yell, but a flash of red light appeared and a vine wrapped around the kid's wrist and then held him a few feet in the air, causing the kid to begin yelling to be let down. Sarutobi and Naruto meanwhile were looking at Bulbasaur, who in turn was looking up at the kid in annoyance. Both had raised eyebrows since Naruto's hands had been nowhere near Bulbasaur's Pokeball when it came out. Naruto took out his Pokédex and flipped it open and said, "Hey Dex, how come Bulbasaur came out when I didn't call him?" The voice of the Pokédex came out of its speakers. Pokémon are capable of exiting the Pokeball on their own once the Pokeball registers them as properly caught. However, since the inside of the Pokeball turns into habitats that are designed with that particular Pokémon in mind through use of spatial holographic technology, they are usually content to remain inside their Pokeballs until called. I just pulled that right out of thin air. Though it will explain how they can stand being inside their Pokeballs for such long periods of time. Naruto and Sarutobi both rose their eyebrows again while the kid had finally stopped shouting and was looking at Bulbasaur in awe. Bulbasaur was meanwhile looking at the kid who had tried to assault its trainer wearily in case he tried anything else, as he set the kid on the floor, keeping its vine around his wrist just in case. Naruto then frowned as he suddenly thought of something and said, "Wait, if they can come out on their own, does that mean that they are aware of what happens outside of the Pokeball when they are inside?" The occupants of the room could have sworn they heard smugness in Dex's voice as it said, "Of course, haven't you noticed the screens on the insides of the balls when they open? Check any episode where the Pokeball is open for longer than a few seconds. You will see that there are actually screens on the inside." No, I haven't," Naruto said as he unclipped Bulbasaur's now empty Pokeball and opened it. Sure enough, there were 4 small screens on the inside of the top half of the ball. Before more could be said though, a man wearing sunglasses and a special Junin vest slid into the open doorway and said, "Honorable grandson, are you in?" He released the honorable grandson, you monster. Bulbasaur shot an annoyed look towards the speaker as its eye twitched at being called a monster and unwrapped its vine before shooting it out at the special Junin, sweeping it under the man's feet, causing him to fall. Naruto rose an eyebrow at his Pokemon's action as the kid stared with his jaw slightly dropped. Bulbasaur then smirked before it walked over to Naruto and pushed the button on its ball with its vine, which drew it back and enclosed in a click. Throughout it all, Sarutobi merely shook his head at the antics of Naruto's Pokémon. The man shakily got to his feet and said while glaring at Naruto, "Keep a leash on that monster of yours, you brat." Naruto was instantly on his feet as he glared at the special Junin and said, "You take that back. Bulbasaur is a Pokémon, not a monster." The man sneered and said, "Or you will do what? But it is no surprise that you took its side. After all, those who are alike tend to stay together." "Ebisu," Sarutobi said sharply, ready to properly reprimand his shinobi but never got the chance. 2 flashes of light later, Ebisu was on the floor with Squirtle on his chest having tackled him, and Charmander had its claws next to his face ready to use its scratch attack. "Squirtle, Charmander, leave him alone, he's not worth it." Squirtle got off of the special Junin's chest and joined Charmander as the 2 Pokémon walked over to Naruto, who had Bulbasaur in his arms, having apparently caught it when it came out of the Pokeball a second time. Said Pokémon was scowling at Ebisu, looking as if it would like nothing better than to shoot a razor leaf barrage at the man. The only thing that was preventing it from doing just that was the fact that Naruto had a hand on its head trying to calm it down as it rubbed the spot between its ears. Sarutobi sighed and said, "Naruto, in the future, please keep your Pokémon from taking such actions against your comrades." Naruto nodded and said he would do his best, while Ebisu sneered, thinking he had won. That instantly changed when Sarutobi said, "Ebisu, I am disappointed in you. I would have thought you would have been a bit more open-minded. But it seems I was wrong. Naruto's Pokémon are no more monsters than the Inuzuka's canine partners. Now apologize to young Naruto here." Ebisu bowed to Sarutobi before he turned to Naruto. Gritting his teeth, he bowed again, but nowhere near as low as the first time, and ground out, "My apologies, Uzumaki. It will not happen again." Naruto nodded and said, "Apology accepted." Taking his hand off of Bulbasaur's head, he took its Pokeball from his belt where he had placed it after Bulbasaur had returned the first time and gave the return command. Once Bulbasaur was back in its Pokeball, Naruto did the same with his other 2 partners before bowing to the Hokage and dismissed himself and left the room. Once he was out of sight, Sarutobi began talking to Ebisu about how he shouldn't judge Naruto for his burden. As this was going on, the kid from before had snuck out and began trailing the blonde. "All right guys, a quick note. I know some of you are wondering why Naruto's Pokémon would fly off the handle like that. The answer is that they are still young. They would be the equivalent of a regular 10-year-old mentally. So when they are insulted, or their trainer is threatened, the first thing that pops in their minds is to take the perpetrator head on." Scene change. Training field behind Hokage Monument. Naruto's Pokémon rejoined the outside world in flashes of red light as he summoned them out of their Pokeballs. "I thought you guys might want to blow off some steam," Naruto said as he created about 10 shadow clones who began taking out scrolls and unsealing targets from them. The Pokémon nodded before they began letting loose with their most destructive attacks that they could use so far, as Naruto's shadow clones kept unsealing targets with another clone that had been given about a quarter of Naruto's overall chakra stores was replacing the target clones whenever they ran out. The targets ranged from standing targets to targets that were thrown. Think of a frisbee or the discs that you shoot at with a gun. Barrages of razor-sharp leaves flew through the air, accompanied by streams of water and small fireballs as the 3 Pokémon tore through the targets. As this was going on, the original was having a spar with another shadow clone that had a little more chakra than the replacing clone so that it could take more than one hit. The kid from the registration office was meanwhile watching them in awe at what was going on. "Can I help you?" The kid jumped about a foot in the air and yelled in surprise before turning around and saw the blonde behind him. The kid looked between the blonde who surprised him and the other that was currently still sparring and said, but, I thought." The blonde chuckled and said, "I'm a clone kid. And you really need to work on your stealth skills. I could tell you were following me the whole time. And your awareness needs a lot of work as well. I've been behind you for a full minute. Now, was there something you want, or do you make it a habit of following newly registered genin?" The kid took an uncertain look as he pointed to the 3 Pokémon who were still tearing through the targets without any sign of stopping soon and said, "I was just wondering where those 3 came from. I've never seen anything like them before." The clone cocked its head wondering what it should tell the kid before it shrugged and said, "You may want to sit down, kid, this could take a while." Scene change. Day of Genin orientation. As Naruto walked through the gate to the academy, he thought about the conversation his clone had with the kid. After Naruto had explained where the Pokemon had came from to the kid who later introduced himself as Konohamaru, the two had began talking about other things. One thing led to another until Naruto decided that he would try to help the kid out a little. And so Naruto had given him a scroll that he had written down minor chakra exercises in and told him to come back when he finished with them, had any trouble, or just wanted to talk. And then Ebisu had shown up. Naruto frowned as he remembered how his Pokemon had almost tried to send the special Junin to the hospital. It was only Naruto's commands that kept them from flying off the handle. Powerful they may be, but they were still mentally children. After all, being sealed in a Pokeball by yourself for who knows how long didn't really encourage mental growth. Naruto wasn't sure how he himself had kept himself from attacking the man when he began insulting them, but had finally just got fed up with him and decided that he deserved a good pranking. Naruto chuckled as he remembered the look on Ebisu's face when Naruto put an E-rank genjutsu over the elite Junin. The man had found himself in a strip club with some of the dancers coming over to him and began giving him lap dances. The man had had a nosebleed so big that it actually shot him back a few feet. When Konohamaru had asked him how he did that, Naruto had just shook his head and told him to ask him again after he had gotten the first chakra control exercises done. Naruto was pulled out of his thoughts when he walked through the door to his classroom and heard, "Hey dead last, what are you doing here? Don't you know only those who graduated could come here today?" Naruto looked at the boy who had said that, the Inuzuka clan heir, Hiba, and tapped his headband and said, "I did pass. Turns out that the reason that I couldn't do the Nasuk clone jutsu properly was because I had way too much chakra to ever be able to do it. So the old man showed me a different type of clone that took a lot more chakra to make and passed me when I showed that I could do it." The rest of the class began muttering to themselves wondering which clone jutsu the blonde could have been taught. Naruto did his best to ignore them and simply took a seat in the middle row. As he sat down, two girls suddenly got trapped in the doorway as they both tried to get inside before the other. Arguing amongst themselves, the two finally fell down on the floor. One of them, Sakura Haruno, was able to get up first and went over to where Naruto was. "Move it, Naruto, I want to sit by Sasuke." Naruto looked up from where he had lowered his head on his arms and said, "No need to yell at me, Sakura. There's an empty seat between us." Sakura blushed from embarrassment and slipped past Naruto to sit in said seat while muttering about dead lasts. As this was going on, the rest of the class was murmuring again, wondering at how the blonde spoke to his crush. Before the blonde could be bothered by questions though, Iruka came in and got everyone's attention. It was time to find out who the teams were going to be. Iruka looked over the children that he had taught for 4 years, some even longer. He knew that some wouldn't be able to make the cut and it tore him inside knowing that he could only do so much to prepare them for what was outside of the village walls. Still, he couldn't help but feel pride at the sight in front of him. The pride grew when he saw his blonde former student who was sitting in the middle. Iruka noticed Naruto's new wardrobe and couldn't help but approve of it. Even with the Kill Me orange jumpsuit, Naruto had been a master of stealth when doing his pranks. Now wearing clothes that were more along the lines of what shinobi of Chunin rank and higher wore, Iruka would have bet good money that he and everyone else would be hard-pressed to find him if he ever wanted to stay hidden. Getting his thoughts back in line, Iruka began his graduation speech that he always gave before calling out teams. In his seat, Naruto half listened to it as he tried to guess who would be with who. Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji were obvious. He had heard stories about their fathers and like the saying went, if it's not broke, don't fix it. The others were a bit harder. Most of the students were simply generalized in their talents. One team that he thought might come out would be Hinata, Hiba, and Shino. Those three each came from clans that in some form or another were trackers. Therefore it would make sense to put them together in such a team. Where the blonde himself would go was anybody's guess in his opinion. A week ago he was the dead last, hiding behind a mask. Now, He was someone who had almost as good chakra control as Sakura and while nowhere near as good as Shikamaru's, a highly strategic mind. If he had to guess though, he would say he would be put into a heavy assault team since with some help from his partners and his shadow clones he could do a lot of damage in a wide area. Naruto perked up and gave his former teacher his full attention when he heard his name being called. Team 7 will be Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno, and Sasuke Uchiha. Your Junin sensei will be Kakashi Hatake. Sakura drooped down hearing who her first teammate was and then shouted out something about true love conquering all when she heard she was going to be on Sasuke's team to the chagrin of most of the other girls. Sasuke hadn't shown any signs of hearing Iruka except to frown slightly before continuing his current brooding session. Naruto mentally groaned. If it was anyone else he would have no trouble just throwing his mask away. But since it was those two, he was going to be having headaches at least 5 times a day. He never actually cared about Sakura in any shape or form. He just chose someone who he knew would never accept him and did what he did to add to the mask. When Naruto dropped it, there was going to be hell from her, he was sure. And Sasuke would be even worse. The kid was obsessed with power to get his revenge. As soon as he saw what Naruto's partners were capable of, he would demand Naruto to hand them over, he was sure of it. And there was no way in hell that was going to happen. Naruto was not about to do that, and there was nothing that could make him. Those 3 were his partners and no one else's. He was the only one that knew how to work with them and knew what to expect from them. Add to the fact that Sasuke wouldn't give a damn about taking proper care of them and just pushing them to and past the breaking point to try and get them as strong as possible as fast as possible, and you had confrontation written all over the situation. Naruto absent-mindedly noticed that he had been right about the last 2 teams before Iruka told them to take an hour break for lunch and then come back to meet their senseis. After he left the classroom, Naruto found himself a secluded spot in the park next to the academy and let his Pokemon out. As the 3 appeared in the usual flashes of light, Naruto sat down under the tree he was standing by and unsealed 4 apples. Taking one of them he said, "Enjoy guys," before taking a bite. The 3 Pokemon each grabbed an apple for themselves before taking their own positions and began eating. Squirtle leaned against Naruto as Charmander sat close to him on their trainer's other side. Bulbasaur had grabbed its apple with a vine and went under another tree to eat by himself. Naruto frowned as he watched one of his partners walk to the other tree before shaking his head and going back to his lunch. Being by himself for so long had made Bulbasaur a bit of a loner when it came to doing anything with the others besides training. Naruto had tried to get the grass type to join the other 2 Pokemon whenever he let them out just to relax, but so far there was no luck. Charmander had also watched Bulbasaur move to be by himself and looked sad that his friend wasn't joining them. Squirtle saw this and popped the whole apple into his mouth and chewed twice before swallowing. He then hopped over Naruto and walked around Charmander before heading to Bulbasaur. Naruto and Charmander watched as the small turtle Pokemon tried to get their teammate to join them. After a short conversation between the 2, Squirtle sighed and walked over to the other 2 and shrugged. Charmander looked down before he began eating his own apple. Squirtle meanwhile climbed into Naruto's lap and laid down, prompting Naruto to begin rubbing its head. Naruto smiled down at it and began rubbing the turtle's head with his free hand as he continued eating his apple with his other. Squirtle closed its eyes as Naruto's rubbing lulled it into a doze. Charmander finished his own apple and leaned against Naruto, who began rubbing his head as well after he had finished eating. Bulbasaur watched the scene and smiled before finishing his apple and closed his eyes as well. Charmander soon followed as all 3 Pokemon enjoyed the relaxing moment while Naruto smiled at them. Scene change. Academy classroom. Naruto walked back into the classroom with his partners back in their Pokeballs. He thought it best that he not draw attention to them since it would only lead to awkward questions from his classmates. Finally came back a dead last. Any later and you would have been late to meet your sensei. Oh, the irony of that statement. Naruto looked over to Ino, who was sitting with her new team like everyone else, and shrugged before taking the empty seat in the back corner before leaning back and placing his legs on the desk and closed his eyes. This brought muttering to the others, who were wondering why Naruto hadn't tried to sit as close to Sakura as possible. Before anyone could ask him though, the senseis began coming and calling out their teams. 2 hours later. Sakura groaned and said, "Where the hell is he? It's been 2 hours." Naruto merely opened one of his eyes before closing it again. The rest of the Team Junin had appeared for their teams within minutes of each other, leaving only Team 7 to wait for their sensei. Naruto would have set up a prank for their Junin teacher for being so late, but was enjoying the peace and quiet for as long as possible. A couple of minutes later, the door slid open and someone said, "Yo. Team 7. Naruto opened his eye again and looked at the man that stepped into the room as Sakura shouted out, "You're late." Naruto rose an eyebrow and opened his other eye as he noticed the hair and immediately recognized the man. There was only one person that Naruto had seen in the village that had silver hair that defied gravity like the man currently in front of him. "Dog. When did he leave Anbu?" Said person studied the 3 kids in front of him for a moment and said, My first impression of you guys is, you're boring." Sakura face vaulted before he continued, "Meet me on the roof in 5 minutes." Kakashi then disappeared in a poof of smoke. Naruto stood up from his seat and stretched before climbing down the stairs and headed to the door. Once there, he turned around and looked at his teammates who hadn't moved yet and said, "You coming?" Sakura shook herself and rushed over to the doorway while Sasuke stood up and began walking over as well. Naruto meanwhile shook his head and thought, "It's going to be so much fun working with these guys." Once everyone was on the roof, Kakashi looked up from his book at his new students who had sat down in a row in front of him with Sakura between the 2 boys. Closing his book, he placed it in his pouch and said, "Okay. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell me a bit about yourselves?" Sakura looked confused and said, Sensei, what do you mean?" Kakashi shrugged and said, "You know, your likes, dislikes, dreams, and hobbies. Why don't you go first to show us how it's done?" Sakura said, causing the 3 males to wonder how this girl was the smartest in the class. Kakashi gave a small sigh and said, "Very well. My name is Kakashi Hatake. I have a few likes and dislikes. My hobbies aren't really something you need to know about. And as for dreams, well, that's none of your business." The 3 genins sweat dropped and thought, all he told us was his name, and we knew that already. Kakashi then pointed to Sakura and said, "All right Pinky, your turn." Sakura glared at the nickname but went anyway. "My name is Sakura Haruno. I looks at Sasuke and blushes. My dislikes are Ino Pig and Naruto." Cue mock pout from Naruto, earning a raised eyebrow from Kakashi, who was the only one to notice it. "My hobbies, well you don't need to know those." Another blush, giving the others a good idea what those hobbies were. "My dream, well," looks at Sasuke again and blushes before giving a squeal, earning a sweat drop from Naruto and Kakashi. "Right," Kakashi said before pointing to Sasuke and said, "You with the duck butt hairdo, your turn." Naruto burst out laughing as Sasuke and Sakura glared at the man. Sasuke then said, "My name is Sasuke Uchiha. I don't have many likes, and many dislikes. I don't have any hobbies. I don't have a dream, that's just a word. What I do have is an ambition. To restore my clan, and to kill a certain man." The thoughts that came from the others were as follows. "He is so cool, I expected as much. Emo." Kakashi then pointed to Naruto and said, "All right Blondie, your turn." Naruto shrugged at the name and said, "My name's Naruto Uzumaki. My likes are training, pulling pranks, ramen, and my partners. My dislikes are anyone who doesn't give others a chance. My hobbies are training with my partners and enjoying time with them. My dream, well 2 dreams actually, is to become Hokage and also become a master trainer." Kakashi rose an eyebrow and thought, he's an interesting one. His profile said that he is a hyperactive kid, but it looks like I was right all those years ago when I thought he was wearing a mask. Still, I wonder who these partners are and what he means by a master trainer. Sakura and Sasuke were looking at Naruto in confusion, and Sakura asked, "What partners are you talking about, Naruto? And what the hell is a master trainer?" Naruto merely smirked and said, "You'll find out eventually." Kakashi decided to get the conversation moving again and said, "All right then. Now that that is out of the way, we can talk about more important things. Like the final exam that I am going to give you." "But sensei, we already passed the final exam," Sakura said in confusion while the 2 boys were thinking similar thoughts. Kakashi shrugged and said, Well yes, you passed the academy final exam. But let's face it, that was easy. It merely tested you to see if you had what it took to earn the right to be tested. Anyone can memorize a few test questions. My test, however, will see if you are actually ready to enter the world of the ninja or if you need to go back to the academy. Oh, and I should probably tell you that the test has a 66% failure rate. Which means that 2 of you will most likely fail. The 3 genins' eyes widened as Kakashi continued, be at training ground 7 at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning for the final exam. Oh, and don't eat breakfast, you'll just throw it up later. Well, see ya. Kakashi then disappeared in a poof of smoke, leaving the 3 kids who were still in minor shock. Naruto shook his head and stood up before walking to the roof's exit and headed to his training field. He had a final to prepare for. Training ground 7 7 o'clock. Training ground 7 was one of the more general training grounds. It had a clearing with 3 training logs when you first came in, surrounded by a forest with a small river running through it. Spread throughout the training ground was a small number of smaller clearings. Naruto was currently leaning up against the back of one of the logs taking a nap while waiting for everyone else when his new teammates showed up. Sakura and Sasuke reached the training ground at roughly the same time. Looking around, they headed to the training logs and began waiting for their teammate and sensei while Sakura tried to have a conversation with Sasuke. On the other side of the logs, Naruto opened an eye before closing it and going back to sleep. If yesterday was any indication, he had a couple of hours until Kakashi appeared. 2 hours later, Kakashi appeared in a poof of smoke. Eye smiling, he said, "Yo. You're late." Sakura screamed out, making everybody wince. Kakashi rubbed the back of his head and said, "Sorry about that. I'm afraid I got lost on the road of life." "You're lying," Sakura shouted even louder. Kakashi shrugged and said, "Well, anyway, it's time to get started on your exam." Sakura gained a confused look and said, "But sensei, Naruto isn't here yet." "Who isn't here yet?" Naruto asked as he walked around the log, surprising the 2 genin. "Where were you for the past 2 hours?" Sakura shouted out. Naruto winced and dug his pinky in one of his ears and said, "Behind the log taking a nap." Sakura and Sasuke stared while Kakashi shook his head and said, "If you 2 didn't notice your teammate all this time, then I don't think you 2 will be able to pass this exam." Sakura and Sasuke glared at their teacher while Naruto simply leaned against the training post. Kakashi ignored the glares and took out an alarm clock, causing Sakura to twitch. "Are you telling me that you had a clock and you were still late?" Sakura asked dangerously. Kakashi eyes smiled and said, "That's right." Earning a face vault from Sakura before he placed the clock on the log Naruto was leaning against before walking back in front of the 3 genin and took out 2 bells on strings and tied them to his belt. "This is your final exam. You must get these bells from me before noon. Any of you who doesn't, well, be tied to one of those poles behind you and watch while I eat my lunch." That's why he told us not to eat breakfast. Sakura and Sasuke thought while their stomachs growled. The 3 then looked over at Naruto, whose stomach hadn't growled. Naruto looked at them and said, "What?" Kakashi rose an eyebrow and said, "Naruto, you didn't by any chance forget my order about not having breakfast, did you?" Naruto shrugged and said, "Technically you gave us a suggestion. But to answer your question, no, I didn't have breakfast. I'm just used to going without food for longer periods of time than most." Kakashi mentally frowned at what that statement implied while Sasuke and Sakura completely dismissed it. Shrugging, Kakashi said, "Well, anyway, I should also tell you that whoever doesn't get a bell will be sent back to the academy." The 3 genin's eyes widened and Sakura said, "But sensei, there's only 2 bells." Kakashi eyes smiled and said, "That's right, Sakura. So at least one of you will be going back regardless." Sakura and Naruto paled for different reasons while Sasuke's eyes narrowed as the 3 began thinking. "I have to pass. This is a test of love, Sakura. No way am I going back to the academy. Good thing I have a couple of aces up my sleeve, Naruto. I have to pass. I cannot get strong enough to beat him in the academy, Sasuke." Kakashi noticed the looks on their faces and mentally grinned before he said, "All right then, let's get started. Oh, and come at me with intent to kill. Otherwise you will never get a bell. Okay, ready, begin." The three genin jumped away from Kakashi and hid themselves in the forest. Kakashi looked around and found Sakura and Sasuke where they were hiding and thought, they know how to hide fairly well for genin it seems. But where's Naruto? A barrage of projectiles suddenly came at Kakashi from the side causing him to jump out of the way. To his surprise, he noticed that said projectiles were actually leaves. He got an even bigger shock as the leaves kept traveling and tore through the trees on the other side of the clearing. Kakashi looked back to where the leaves had originated but didn't see anything in the woods. Sakura and Sasuke both stared from their hiding spots and wondered just what the hell the dead last had just done. With Naruto, he frowned from his spot in a tree. Looking down at the ground where Bulbasaur was, he said, well, that was disappointing. Do you think you could get him with a wider spread? Bulbasaur looked up at its trainer and somehow seemed to shrug before looking back at its target and let loose with another barrage. Back with Kakashi, he spotted another barrage heading his way, spread out and started dodging again. As more leaves came, he started traveling towards the point of origin hoping to find out what Naruto was doing to shoot the leaves. However, by the time he got there, nothing was there. Looking down at the ground, he noticed a set of footprints that confused him. It looked like a small four-legged animal that had 3 toes on the front and a round back. A bit farther in the forest, Naruto studied his opponent as he clipped Bulbasaur's Pokeball back to his belt. It was apparent that Naruto wouldn't be able to get the bells by hitting the silver-haired Junin with Bulbasaur's ranged attack, and Naruto doubted that its Vine Whip or Leech Seed would have any more success. It was time to switch tactics. Kakashi went back to the clearing after about a minute of looking for Naruto and whatever kind of animal was with him. He was about to go after the other two when a voice spoke up behind him. And where do you think you're going? Kakashi turned around and saw Naruto standing about 10 feet behind him with his arms crossed. He's good. I barely noticed him before he spoke up. Kakashi thought, hiding his surprise, and said, you're a bit odd, you know that, right? Naruto shrugged and said, so, even if I am, I'm getting one of those bells. Kakashi rose his visible eyebrow and said, is that so? I find that hard to believe considering you were the dead last of your class. He then reached into his pouch, making Naruto tense, getting ready to get out of the way of whatever weapon his teacher pulled out. When said teacher pulled out his orange book that he had been reading before the introductions, Naruto face vaulted. Getting back up, he said, what are you doing reading your book during a fight? Kakashi opened the book and said, well, I want to know what happens next, obviously. Don't worry though, I assure you, I can still take you on with one hand. Naruto frowned before he crossed his hands. 6 clones suddenly appeared in puffs of smoke, making Kakashi's eye to widen slightly before Naruto said, get him. The clones launched themselves at Kakashi, who began dodging and blocking the clones' attacks while Naruto hung back looking for any openings in how the Junin fought. As this was going on, Kakashi said, Ninja Arts 101, Lesson 1 Taijutsu. Right after he finished talking, Kakashi started tearing the clones apart. Once they were gone, he got into a relaxed position and said, I hope that wasn't the best you could do. If so, then I'm afraid you have no chance of getting a bell. Naruto frowned again as he went over the fight in his mind, analyzing not only what he had seen but what the clones themselves had observed during their fight. Naruto then crossed his fingers again. This time only 4 clones appeared, making Kakashi wonder how good his chakra control was before the clones rushed him. Kakashi punched the first clone as it came at him. Expecting it to dispel, Kakashi instead saw a brief flash of blue, causing his eye to widen before the clone exploded. Kakashi jumped back, barely avoiding the explosion before the other 3 launched out of the smoke cloud and landed in a triangle formation around the Junin with only a couple of feet between each clone. Grinning evilly, they said at the same time, boom. Kakashi's eye widened even further as the clones exploded, rocking the ground with him in the middle. In the forest, Sakura's eyes widened, thinking that Naruto had killed their sensei, while Sasuke's narrowed as he angrily thought that he should have that kind of power and not the dead last. Naruto meanwhile was looking towards the crater he had formed, waiting for the smoke to dissipate and keeping the rest of his senses on alert just in case Kakashi had gotten away. As the smoke finally cleared enough for Naruto to see, he saw a torched log in the crater where Kakashi had been. Ninja Rule 23. Always have a log nearby to substitute with. Naruto turned around and saw Kakashi at the edge of the forest. In her spot, Sakura breathed a sigh of relief. Kakashi meanwhile narrowed his eye and said, I know I said come at me with intent to kill Naruto, but don't you think that was a bit overkill? Naruto shrugged and said, not really. Like you just said, you told us to fight with intent to kill. Kakashi frowned before he rushed Naruto, who began backpedaling as he did his best to not let the silver-haired Junin land a blow on him. However, it wasn't long before Kakashi got behind him in a crouching position with his hands in the tiger seal. When Sasuke saw this, he shouted out, Naruto, get out of there. He's going to use a fire jutsu. Anyone actually know why Sasuke would say that in canon? I would have thought he wouldn't care about the dead last getting barbecued. Naruto's eyes widened, but before he could jump out of the way, Kakashi rammed his hands forward into Naruto's behind and said, hidden leaf hidden technique, 1,000 years of death. Naruto's eyes screwed up before he was launched into the air with a yell before landing in the river. Sakura and Sasuke were meanwhile staring with their jaws dropped, trying to figure out how the hell that was a village secret technique. In the river, Naruto growled and thought, that does it. This guy is so going down. Reaching down to his belt, he pulled out a Pokeball and pressed the button twice. It expanded before opening, releasing its occupant. Well, that takes care of him. Now then, let's see how the other two do, Kakashi said to himself as he began walking towards the other two. He had only taken a couple of steps though when a stream of water shot out of the river and slammed into him. Or at least that's what the two dry genin thought until the same log from before appeared in Kakashi's place with the Junin back in the middle of the blast area. Before Kakashi could do anything though, two figures launched themselves out of the river and appeared in front of him. One figure could easily be identified as Naruto, but the other figure was something that the Junin had never seen before. Kakashi studied the blue turtle in front of him before looking at Naruto and said, I take it this is one of your partners you mentioned. Naruto smiled and said, that's right. Kakashi cocked his head and said, would it be right to assume that you had another partner launch those leaves earlier? Naruto smirked and said, you're 2 for 2 sensei, but I'm afraid I don't have time for 20 questions. Squirtle. Bubble Beam. The small turtle Pokemon opened its mouth, shooting out a stream of fast-traveling bubbles at the Junin, who jumped out of the way, not wanting to take a chance even if they were bubbles. Good thing he did too, since when the bubbles floated down to the ground, they burst in miniature explosions of air. Squirtle kept launching the streams as Naruto took the other 2 Pokeballs from his belt and threw them in the air. The 2 balls opened and shot their beams to the ground a few feet on either side of Squirtle, revealing Bulbasaur on its left and Charmander on its right. The other 3 shinobi's eyes widened at the sight of the other 2 as their Pokeballs returned to Naruto's hands. Putting them back on his belt, he said, Squirtle, keep it up. Bulbasaur, Razor Leaf, Charmander, Ember. Squirtle opened its mouth again and fired more streams of bubbles at the Junin, while Charmander followed suit with small fireballs launching themselves from the fire lizard's mouth. While the 2 bipedal Pokemon were launching their attacks from their mouths, Bulbasaur was launching leaves out of both sides of its bulb and sending them as fast as possible towards the Junin. Kakashi was forced to dodge the attacks. As the 3 Pokemon worked in tandem to box him in, Naruto threw a single kunai and shuriken, making Kakashi wonder what the blonde was planning before the blonde ran through a quick sequence of hand signs, turning the 2 throwing weapons into 50 each. Kakashi actually cursed as he jumped even further back and began blocking the weapons with his own kunai. When he landed, his back was against a tree trunk. Sasuke saw this as a chance to launch his own attack and sent his own brace of shuriken at the man. The tools pierced the man's skin before he traded places with another log. Sasuke's eyes widened and he took off through the woods, trying to get away from his blown cover spot. As this was happening, Naruto frowned and tried to figure out how to track the man down. He then began forming hand signs and thought, I'm glad I figured out how to do this properly. Transform. Smoke covered Naruto as his partners watched. As it dispersed, Sakura's eyes bugged out when she saw what the blonde had transformed into. Naruto was now standing on 4 legs and was covered in white fur. But what really caught Sakura's attention was the 9 tails that were behind the albino fox. No, Naruto can't just turn into a Pokemon and use its attacks. Not yet anyway. Maybe after the time skip. He does get heightened senses though. The Ninetales closed its eyes and began breathing through its nose trying to pick up the silver Junin's scent. But before he could, a shout came from the forest. All three Pokémon and the transformed human's head snapped towards the sound before taking off towards it at a run. Sakura meanwhile had heard the shout as well and took off thinking, that was Sasuke just now. Did Kakashi get him? No, he couldn't, not Sasuke. She spotted a flash of silver and stopped hiding behind some bushes trying to keep low. A voice suddenly spoke behind her. Hey, Sakura. Sakura whirled around and saw Kakashi before a whirlwind of leaves surrounded her. When it cleared, Sakura looked around frantically seeing no one. She then heard another voice that she recognized causing her to whirl around. Sakura. Sakura turned with a smile and shouted out, Sasuke. Before her eyes widened in horror. Standing in front of her, Sasuke was panting while covered in blood with some kunai and shuriken still stuck in him. Sasuke walked towards her and said in a pained voice, Sakura, help me. Please. Before collapsing, Sakura backed up with her hand going to her mouth before she screamed and fainted. Kakashi looked at her and said, Ninja Arts 101 Lesson 2 Genjutsu. I wonder if I went a little overboard. Her file said that she was a Genjutsu type. Oh well, better go find Naruto. No telling what that kid will come up with if I leave him alone for too long. Said Blonde and his partners were currently running through the trees before they came upon a clearing smaller than the one at the gate. Coming to it, they found the back of a head with duck butt hair sticking out of a hole in the ground. The four walked slowly over to it looking out for Kakashi before moving to the front. Seeing Sasuke's scowling face, Squirtle burst into laughter and began rolling around holding the front of its shell. The other three snickered as well. Any fear Sasuke had from seeing a nine-tailed fox disappeared and he scowled as he said, Stop laughing. Don't just stand there, go get that dead last partner of yours and get me out of here. The three Pokémon stopped laughing and glared at the emo as the Ninetales said, Geez Sasuke, calm down. You gotta admit, when you think about it, it's actually funny. Sasuke's eyes widened as a cloud of smoke surrounded the fox before dispersing revealing the blonde. Naruto looked at Sasuke and cocked his head in thought before creating a shadow clone. Sasuke was about to ask what the dead last was doing before the clone replaced himself with Sasuke and then dispelled itself from the position in the hole. Sasuke stared at the spot the clone was trying to figure out how a clone could do a replacement with another person. He suddenly snapped out of it when Naruto practically shouted in his ear. Sasuke, said Emo jerked and glared at the blonde and said, What the hell was that for dead last? Naruto's eyes narrowed and he said, It was to get your attention. I had asked you a question and you weren't listening. I had said that I don't think any of us can take Kakashi alone even with my partners helping me. Our best bet is for us as well as Sakura to work together as a team to get the bells. Once we do, we can decide who gets a bell and who doesn't. Now are you going to help me convince Sakura or not? Sasuke studied the blonde in front of him for a minute going over everything that had happened so far in his mind before reluctantly nodding. Naruto nodded as well before transforming again. To Sasuke's surprise however, Naruto didn't turn into a Ninetales. Instead he looked like a dog whose head came just above Sasuke's knees, with dominantly red fur with black stripes as well as white fur on his chest and a white tuft on its head. Growlith. Naruto took a few quick sniffs of the air before taking off in a direction with his partners following him. Sasuke hesitated for a minute before he took off after them. Once the group had left, the air in a tree branch shimmered before revealing Kakashi who was looking towards where the group left with a smile. Well now, it seems Naruto understands the test even if only partially. And it seems Sasuke is willing to go along with it for now. And if those two manage to convince Sakura I may just have a team that's actually worth teaching this time. The transformed genin led the group to an area close by. Getting there, they found Sakura lying on the floor in an unconscious heap. Naruto dropped his transformation and knelt down next to her. Squirtle cocked his head and said something in his species language earning a WTF look from Sasuke as Naruto chuckled and said, No, he didn't kill her Squirtle, she's just under a genjutsu. Release. Sakura stirred and opened her eyes. Looking around, She spotted Sasuke and her eyes widened before she glonked the Uchiha air and began crying about how she was so glad he wasn't a bloody pincushion earning raised eyebrows from everyone else. Naruto shook his head and said, "As much as I'd like to ask just what you saw while you were under Sakura, we've got things to do and little time to do it. Sasuke, can you please explain to her what we figured out about the test so far?" Sasuke shot a look that clearly said, "Do I have to?" Earning a nod from the blonde. Sighing, Sasuke began explaining what Naruto had told him. Kakashi was currently waiting in the main field. He had no doubt that Naruto and Sasuke would be able to get Sakura to help them. If there is one thing you could depend on a fangirl for, they would agree to do practically anything for their source of affection, so for now he was simply waiting for them to come up with a plan. As he waited, his thoughts drifted towards one of his students in particular. Yes, students. It was obvious that they could work together when needed, so they already passed. He was just curious to see what they would come up with. Truth be told though, Kakashi was a little afraid what Naruto would come up with. Kakashi had been surprised time after another when dealing with him ever since the test started. Able to use shadow clones and making them explode, knew the other shadow clone techniques for weapons, and the fact that he obviously knew how to work with his partners well. Add to the fact that he could apparently turn into a few of them himself and you had one dangerous kid. Never mind the fact that Naruto was the king of pranksters in the village. He was going to have a talk with the blonde later though. He needed answers to the questions that popped up from the blonde's actions today. Kakashi was brought out of his thoughts by a brace of shuriken being launched at him. As he jumped out of the way, a light blue and yellow blur came at him close to the ground before jumping into the air. As it got close to him, a cloud of smoke appeared before Naruto blew out of it and attempted to land a punch on the Junin. Kakashi quickly diverted the blonde's path and pushed him away, not wanting to risk it being an exploding shadow clone. As soon as Kakashi landed, he heard a roar coming from behind. Jumping out of the way of the fireball and trying to find Sasuke, he was too distracted to see the flash of light from Naruto's position before two vines wrapped around him. Kakashi's eye widened as he followed the path of the vines to the grass Pokemon from before that was in front of its trainer smirking at him. Kakashi sighed as Bulbasaur lowered him to the ground and Naruto walked over to him and grabbed the bells right before the bell rang. As it did, Sakura and Sasuke walked out of the woods with a smile and small smirk respectively. Bulbasaur let Kakashi go and he walked over to the clock and shut it off. Turning to Naruto he said, "Congratulations Naruto, you were able to get both bells. Now then, who are you going to give a bell to?" Sakura got a nervous look and Sasuke got nervous on the inside as well, although he was hiding it better. So the two were understandably surprised when Naruto said, "Both," and tossed both bells to them, making their eyes widen. Kakashi rose an eyebrow and said, "So you are choosing to be the one to go back even though you were the one to get both bells?" Naruto shrugged and said, "Might as well. One more year won't hurt me and these two were the best this year. They deserve to go forward, not back." Sakura and Sasuke gaped before Sasuke stepped up and said, "No way, dead last. Take my bell. Another year won't hurt me since I'll just be rookie of the year again." "No, take my bell," Sakura said as she tried to give it to Naruto. "I didn't really do anything to deserve it. It was your plan and you and Sasuke did most of the work. I should be the one to go back to the academy." "That won't be necessary." The three looked to Kakashi who was smiling and said, "You all pass." Sakura and Sasuke's eyes widened as Naruto mentally smirked and thought, "I thought so." "What do you mean we all pass? You said only two could pass." Sakura said. "Simply misdirection," Kakashi said before continuing, "The test was never about actually getting the bells. It was about putting aside your differences and working as a group. I must admit you three had me worried at first, but you came through in the end. Congratulations. But before you celebrate, let me show you something." He walked over to a stone monument that the three now official genin hadn't noticed before. "You see this stone? This stone holds the names of ninja who are considered heroes of the leaf. They are honored as much as the Hokages." Sakura and Sasuke's eyes widened at this while Naruto grinned and said, "Then I guess it will have my name on it someday." Kakashi shook his head and said, "I honestly hope that is not the case Naruto." Naruto narrowed his eyes and said, and why might that be? In a dangerous tone of voice that his teammates had never heard from him before. Kakashi looked him straight in the eye and said, because this monument honors those ninja who were Kia. Sakura and Sasuke flinched while Naruto's face relaxed as he realized that he had found someone else who cared about him. Naruto's face then got a determined look and he said, well, I'd rather be on that monument and killed in action than dying in my sleep at some old age. What is the point of becoming Hokage or even a ninja of this village if you are not willing to give everything you have for it? At his side, Bulbasaur nodded, and unseen by everyone else, his other two partners nodded as well inside their Pokeballs. Everyone else's eyes widened before Kakashi I smiled and said, well said Naruto. I have to go report to the Hokage now that the test is over, but before I go, let me just say one more thing. Those who break the rules are trash. But those who abandon their friends are worse than trash. With that being said, meet here tomorrow at 8 for missions. Also, congratulations on becoming the first ever 6-man team. Well, see ya. And with that, he disappeared in a cloud of smoke, leaving his new team to celebrate their accomplishment. Kakashi appeared in a poof of smoke in the Hokage's office. Around him were the other Junin who had tested this year's graduates. In the back was Iruka, who was leaning against the wall next to the door. Now that everyone's here, we can begin, Sarutobi said, earning chuckles from the other Junin. Nodding to the first Junin, Sarutobi pulled out a list of the teams that had 2 checkboxes for each row and held a pen over the sheet. At the top of the 2 columns were pass and fail. The first Junin stepped forward and said, Team 1 fail. Team 2 fail. Team 3 fail. Team 4 fail. Team 5 fail. Team 6 fail. Team 7 pass. Almost everyone in the room's eyes widened since Kakashi had never passed a team before. Kurenai shook her head and gave her own report. Team 8 pass. Team 10 pass. Sarutobi nodded as he checked the last box before turning to the 3 Junin who passed their teams and said, very well then. Now that that is done, why don't you 3 tell us how they passed? Kurenai nodded again and said, I tested my team on how well they could track me down and work together. The 3 worked together well with no problems. Asuma took out a cigarette and lit it while ignoring Kurenai's glare and said, I tested my team on how well they could work together in taking my lighter from me. The team worked well when Shikamaru formulated a plan for them. Kakashi looked up from the book that he had been reading and said, I gave my team the bell test. They had problems at first working together before one of them convinced the others to work together and was able to retrieve the bells. It must have been Sasuke. He was the only one on that team who actually had any skills. One of the random Junin who had tested one of the other teams said, earning agreement from the others. Actually, it was Naruto who did so. He was really full of surprises. Shadow clones that could explode, those 3 partners of his, and the ability to use the kunai and shuriken shadow clone jutsu. He really does deserve his title of most unpredictable ninja of the leaf. All of the other Junin had looks of surprise as they heard this, while Iruka and Sarutobi had smirks on their faces. Sarutobi leaned forward and said, I see. Well, I believe that's everything. Dismissed. Scene change. Ichiraku's. Naruto was currently eating his 3rd bowl as he explained to the Ichiraku family how his bell test had gone. On the counter, his partners each had a bowl of ramen themselves that they were eating out of. It had been very surprising for the 2 when Bulbasaur had shown that it could actually use chopsticks by using its vine whip. And when we found him, he was buried up to his chin in the ground. Had to use a shadow clone to replace with him to get him out. The 2 chuckled before the flaps over the stand parted and a voice said, 1 miso ramen please. Naruto and his partners looked over at Kakashi as he took a seat next to his student while the couple got to work on the new order. Naruto, we need to talk, Kakashi said as soon as he was seated. About? Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. Kakashi looked him in the eye and said, about how you knew those shadow clone techniques as well as where you got these partners of yours and more importantly learned how to transform into those other creatures. I could tell that you had actually literally transformed into them instead of just using a basic hinge, and that's supposed to be impossible. Naruto took another bite out of his ramen before shrugging as he slurped up the noodles and swallowed before saying, it's not really that big of a deal. I've always done the transformation jutsu that way. It's how I learned how to do it. Ignoring Kakashi's look of shock, he continued, as for the shadow clone jutsu, the old man let me learn it in the exploding clone jutsu from the Forbidden Scroll when we made the trap for Mizuki. I learned Shuriken and Kunai shadow clone jutsu from the Shinobi library when I went there after I graduated, although I got to tell you, the librarian wasn't happy to let me through even if I did graduate. Can't say I blame him though, since he probably thought I would try to do a prank in there or log forbid, do something to the books and scrolls that were in there. As for my partners, they were the second thing that the old man told me to look at when I took the scroll. They were in a storage seal along with the Pokédex that tested me to see if I could be their trainer. Said partners nodded at this while Kakashi looked confused. What's a Pokédex? Kakashi asked. Naruto reached into an inside pocket in his vest and pulled the device out. Handing it to Kakashi, he said, It's an encyclopedia that has an entry for every single Pokemon that used to be out there. Now Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle are the only ones left. I used this to help me transform into other Pokemon. Here, look. And with that, he reached over and flipped the device open and pushed a button that said Last Search. As soon as he did, a picture of a canine-like creature appeared that was light blue and yellow. Manectric. The discharge Pokemon. It discharges lightning from its mane. It creates a thundercloud overhead to drop lightning bolts. Kakashi nearly dropped the Pokédex in surprise, causing Naruto to chuckle and said, Yeah, I almost did that myself a couple of times. It's really helpful. There's actually entries about how each of the different Pokemon's body works. It's really impressive since there are 493 Pokemon in there. Whoever made it put a buttload of work into it. Kakashi nodded and handed the device back to Naruto, who then pushed another button labeled Technical Machine and said, It can actually help my partners learn moves as well, although it suggested that they learn some more of their own moves first. Kakashi leaned over and looked at the list of moves that had TM and a number in front of each entry and said, It actually recommends stuff like that. I mean, I know you said that it gives you information, but it also advises you. That is correct. It is my job to guide the trainer. Dex said, causing Kakashi and the Ichirakus to jump and look at the red device in surprise. Naruto and the three Pokemon chuckled at their expressions, and Naruto said, Yeah, I forgot to mention that the Pokédex itself is practically sentient as well. It doesn't usually say anything unless it is asked a question though. Ah, Kakashi said as his meal was put in front of him. Picking up the bowl, the man turned away from Naruto before turning back with an empty bowl, earning raised eyebrows from the others. Dang, there goes my record for fastest time eating a bowl of ramen, you old dog. Naruto said, causing the Ichirakus and Kakashi to chuckle before Kakashi stiffened as he actually took notice of what Naruto called him. Kakashi studied Naruto for a moment and said, Funny you should call me that, Naruto. I do summon dogs to help me on my missions, but how would you know that? Naruto smirked before turning back to his bowl and said, Who says I was talking about them? Kakashi frowned and said, Indeed. You wouldn't happen to have any more surprises you're hiding from me and your teammates, would you, Naruto? Naruto looked up in thought for a minute before shrugging and going back to his meal. After slurping some more noodles, he said, Does trying to learn how to perform a Pokemon's attacks while transformed as one count? Kakashi stared before he said, Why does something tell me to fear for us all if you ever succeed? The three Pokemon drew attention to themselves as Squirtle said something before making an exploding motion and sound while being mimicked by Charmander, who also flared his tail flame before dropping it back to its normal intensity a second later. Bulbasaur merely smirked at the two before nodding and going back to its meal. Kakashi stared at the three and said, You're not helping to put me at ease, you know. Squirtle shrugged and said something that caused Naruto to laugh. Turning to his student, Kakashi rose an eyebrow and said, Do I even want to know what he said? Naruto chuckled again and said, That depends. Do you want to be able to go to sleep tonight? Kakashi sighed and dropped his head and said, I guess not. Naruto finished his bowl and patted his teacher on the shoulder as he put down money for his meal and said, Don't worry, sensei, I'll give you a heads up if I ever do figure out a way to do so. See you around, old man. That's comforting. Kakashi sighed as his students' partners returned to their Pokeballs and he left the stand. Ah, don't worry, Kakashi. The boy knows when not to take things too far, Chuki said as he brought Naruto's bowls back to the kitchen to wash them. Kakashi sighed again as he laid down money for his own meal and said, I'm afraid I'll have to take your word on that. Scene change. 1 month later, Forest. Team, this is Leader, what's your status? Over. This is Onyx. Target spotted and I am in position. This is Pink. In position. This is Gold. Me and Green are in position and ready to get this show on the road. All right team, commence operation. 2 blurs launched themselves from around 2 separate trees towards a figure that was on the forest floor. The figure turned around and hissed at the 2, showing it to be a cat before it took off into the forest. Before it could get far though, an ape-shaped figure that was about the same height as its pursuers and was brown, yellow, red, and white with black hands and feet landed in front of it. What really spooked the cat though was that the top of the figure's head seemed to be on fire. The cat's eyes widened before a seed shot out of a nearby bush and latched onto the cat with vines that wrapped around the animal before they glowed red. 5 seconds later, the cat dropped to the floor in an unconscious heap. Bulbasaur walked out of the bushes as Sasuke and Sakura appeared. As they did, the Infernape smirked before disappearing in a cloud of smoke to reveal Naruto. Putting a hand against the radio headset in his right ear, Naruto said, "This is Gold. Target apprehended. Confirm target's identity." Sakura walked over and picked up the unconscious cat after Bulbasaur absorbed its seed while Sasuke looked at its ear. Target confirmed to have ribbon on its right ear with Tora written on it. Very well. Mission. Catch Tora as a success. Return to the tower. Roger that. The 3 humans said as they began heading out of the forest with Bulbasaur walking by Naruto's side. As they came out and were joined by Kakashi, Naruto looked down at his partner and said, "You guys are lifesavers. Have I ever told you that?" Bulbasaur smirked and nodded, knowing what his trainer was talking about. No matter what the mission was, Naruto's partners had always proved their worth. Whether it was helping to clear fields or cut grass with Bulbasaur's razor leaf, Charmander helping at the bakery and other places that required near-constant flames, or Squirtle helping them clean out lakes and rivers, the 3 were always willing to help their trainer finish his mission faster. As the team walked into the tower, Naruto recalled his Pokémon. This hadn't been the first time they had been assigned to catch Tora, and the first time Naruto had made the mistake of not recalling his Pokémon before meeting with the daimyo's wife. Needless to say, Bulbasaur had been a bit traumatized by how the lady had nearly hugged him to death. 5 minutes later, the revived Tora was being smothered by the rather large woman as she walked out the door. As it closed, Sarutobi shuffled through the mission scrolls and said, "Well done Team 7. Now then, we have quite a few more missions you can take. There's walking the Inuzuka's dogs, babysitting one of the counselor's children. We have a building that is ready for demolition that I'm sure you would enjoy, Naruto, and Tora, come back," and catching Tora again, Sarutobi finished lamely. Naruto rolled his eyes as he reached for a Pokeball and said, "I knew I shouldn't have revived that cat." Before Naruto could take drastic action against the demon hiding in a small cat's body though, Kakashi put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Actually Lord Hokage, I believe that my team is ready for a higher mission." The 3 genin looked at Kakashi with hopeful eyes before Iruka burst their bubble. "But Kakashi, it's only been a month. They couldn't possibly be ready for a C-ranked mission." Naruto turned to his former teacher and said, "And why not Iruka-sensei? Sasuke and Sakura were the best in our class and me and my partners can handle practically anything Kakashi-sensei throws at us when we're training. What is babysitting a couple of kids going to prepare us for anyway? The only thing I see that preparing me for is dealing with the council when I finally claim the old man's hat." Said old man chuckled as he said, "He does have a point there, Iruka. After all, this team does have 7 members instead of the usual 4. I'm sure they can handle a simple C rank. Can you please pass them to me?" Iruka wanted to argue the point but respected his leader's decision, so he instead sighed before handing over the requested missions. Sarutobi looked through them before stopping on a particular one. "This should do for a first C rank. You will be escorting a very important person on their way back home." Naruto perked up and said, "Who is it?" "Some noble who paid the village a visit." He then paled and said, "It's not the daimyo's wife and her pet cat, is it?" Sasuke and Sakura also paled as they heard the question while Sarutobi merely chuckled and said, "No, that's for a more experienced team, I'm afraid." He chuckled again as the genin in the room sighed in relief before continuing. You will be escorting a bridge builder as he returns home to the land of waves and finishes building his bridge. You can expect bandits, but that's it. Please send him in. The door opened and an old man with gray hair and a beard with a large brim hat on his head and a towel around his shoulders. In his hand was a large sake bottle, and Naruto's nose, which had began getting more sensitive lately due to his progressive transforming into Pokemon with advanced tracking senses, picked up that the old man was probably a good way through the bottle if the smell of his breath was anything to judge by. The man frowned and said, "These are the super ninja that are supposed to be protecting me. They look like a bunch of wet-nosed brats. Especially the midget. He's got the face of an imbecile. It's a joke, right? You kids aren't really ninja, are you?" Naruto frowned. His size was a real touchy subject, since the only thing he had really been able to afford before he graduated was ramen most of the time, thanks to the villagers overcharging him for food most of the time. And while he did love ramen as much as he said he did, even he knew that it wasn't the best for him, which was why he mainly only ate it at Ichiraku's now. A gleam then appeared in Naruto's eye, causing his two teammates to slowly begin backing away. "So you think I'm a midget that's an imbecile, eh?" Naruto asked as he grinned before he made a hand sign, making the man nervous. Naruto was then covered in smoke, which faded away to reveal a large brown bear with a yellow circle on its chest that easily stood at least a head over everybody else and whose ears were flattened against the ceiling. The bear then walked over to the man and placed a paw on his shoulder, causing him to stumble a little, and said, "Do you still think I'm a wet-nosed brat?" The man began sweating and said, "And no." The Ursaring smirked and said, "Good cause, believe me, I can turn into things that are a whole lot worse than this, but I don't want to destroy this tower." "All right, Naruto, that's enough tormenting the client," Kakashi said, not once looking up from his book. The Ursaring shrugged before it was covered in smoke, revealing Naruto, who walked back over to his teammates. Sarutobi chuckled at the blonde's antics as Iruka shook his head before he said, "Mr. Tazuna, I assure you that these three are the best of their year. They will be more than enough to protect you from bandits, and if they do run into more than they can handle, I'm sure their Junin instructor could handle things." Tazuna simply nodded while keeping a nervous eye on the blonde, who smirked at him. Sarutobi handed Kakashi the mission scroll, who opened it and read the contents. "All right guys, this looks like it will be a 2-week mission tops, so pack accordingly for a long-term mission out of the village. We'll meet at the gates in 1 hour." The three genin nodded before Naruto made the same hand sign again and transformed into a small bird that was almost completely brown besides its white belly. The transformed genin then flew out of an open window and headed to its apartment, much to everyone else's surprise. I didn't realize he had learned how to fly when he transforms into a flying type." "Did you, Kakashi?" Sarutobi said as he watched the bird's form grow smaller. "No, Lord Hokage. I have to admit though, that must come in very handy." Sasuke frowned, wondering just how strong Naruto had become and just what he could and couldn't do before walking out the door to head towards his clan compound. Village main gate. 1 hour later. Naruto leaned against the gate as he waited for the rest of his team to show up while his 3 Pokemon were out. Squirtle and Charmander were talking about how excited they were to see what was beyond the village, while Bulbasaur was simply sitting by the gate enjoying the relative peace and quiet. He spotted Sakura and Sasuke heading towards him and smirked as he thought of a way to take advantage of them always seeming to meet up with him at the same time. As they got closer, he said, "You know guys, I really don't see why you two don't just say you're a couple. You two always seem to arrive at team meetings together anyways." Squirtle burst out laughing while Bulbasaur smirked. Charmander simply gave a gentle smile as Sakura blushed while Sasuke scowled and said, "Don't be an idiot." Naruto shrugged and said, "Just saying." Before he looked past the two and his eyes widened, as well as his partners who had looked where he was when their trainer had began looking shocked at what he was seeing. "What?" Sakura asked before looking in the right direction as well, and her jaw lowered a bit. Walking towards them was Tazuna with Kakashi beside him on time for once. "Yo," Kakashi said as he rose his hand in greeting once he was next to his students. Naruto and Sakura put their hands together into the ram sign and simultaneously said, "Release." Kakashi's sweat dropped and said, "What was that for?" "To dispel the genjutsu that we're obviously in." "There's no way you could possibly be Kakashi-sensei." Naruto said as Sakura nodded her head in agreement. Kakashi sighed and said, I can be on time if it's important, you know. You mean you training us isn't important? Sakura shouted out, causing everyone around them to wince. Kakashi rubbed the back of his head and said, why don't we just go if everybody's ready? Naruto nodded and recalled his Pokemon, drawing a confused look from Tazuna, who had just noticed the basic Pokemon before walking out of the gates with everyone falling in behind him. It would take a couple of days to reach Wave at the pace they would have to take to not tire out their client. The sooner they left, the sooner they could get there. It had been a relatively quiet trip so far if you ignored Sakura trying to have a conversation with Sasuke every 15 minutes. Naruto meanwhile was doing his best to stay as aware as possible. Looking up into the sky when a small shadow passed over the group, he saw one of his transformed clones fly past. Naruto frowned when the clone dispelled a short time later, sending Naruto its memories, including an aerial view of a puddle on the side of the road. Kakashi saw his student stiffen and recognized the signs of information being received from a shadow clone. He frowned as well, wondering why Naruto's shadow clone would dispel. He was brought out of his thoughts though when Sakura turned to him and said, Hey Kakashi-sensei, does the Land of Waves have its own ninja? He was saved from answering the question by Naruto. Sakura, would our client go all the way to the Leaf Village for protection if he could just ask for help from the village in his own country? Sakura blushed in embarrassment as she looked down and muttered, I guess not. Naruto shook his head before he spotted the puddle from before. Placing a hand over his Pokeballs, he began lightly tapping the three with his fingers in a code that he and Kakashi had taught his partners for when Naruto had to give them orders before they could come out. He felt the seals that Kakashi had put on the balls vibrate, telling him that his partners understood what he needed from them. Kakashi took notice of both the puddle and Naruto tapping on the Pokeballs. Coming to a decision, he prepared himself to do a quick replacement and see how his students handled the situation. After the group had passed the puddle, two figures seemed to melt out of it before launching themselves at Kakashi and wrapped the man in a chain. Kakashi's eye widened as he said, What? Before the two men pulled on the chains, tearing him to shreds. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura screamed out while the two men chuckled. One down, the figure on the left said while the other continued, 3 to go. As they made their way towards the others focusing on Tazuna, they were interrupted by 3 red flashes of light and a shout of, Get him! Before they could figure out what was happening, a blast of fire and a high-powered stream of water slammed into the two, burning the right figure and sending the second flying before coming to a sudden halt when the chain connected to the two ran taut. A seed then hit the first figure a moment before a second seed landed on the fallen figure. Vines shot out of the seeds and drained the two figures, who slumped over unconscious. Sakura, Sasuke, and Tazuna stared at Naruto, who had his partners in front of him. The attacks had barely taken 10 seconds from beginning to end and they hadn't even heard Naruto give any orders to his partners. Not bad, Naruto. That was a good plan of yours, Kakashi said as he walked out of the forest and walked over to the first figure, who still had a few small fires on his clothes. As he extinguished the flames, Sakura said, Kakashi-sensei, how are you still alive? We saw you die. Naruto shook his head again as Kakashi pointed to where he had died. Instead of a bloody cut-up body though, there was a cut-up log. Turning back to Naruto, he said, I know your clone told you about the ambush, but how did you know there would be 2 of them? Naruto shrugged and said, the clone transformed into a Growlithe to check it out from a distance before it dispelled. It had smelled 2 different people, so it was pretty obvious. Didn't know that they were connected by a chain though. But it did make things easier anyway. Kakashi nodded, accepting the blonde's answer. Wait, if you knew they were there, then why did you wait to take them out? Tazuna asked as he tried not to become sick by the sight of the badly burnt figure. Sakura was having similar problems since this was the first time she had seen someone in such a state. Well, I wanted to see how my students handled themselves for one thing, although it looks like Naruto had other ideas. Also, I needed to know if they were targeting us or you, Kakashi said before he gave the bridge builder a hard look and said, you told us that all we would have to worry about were some bandits. So what are 2 Chunin level ninja doing targeting you for? Tazuna sighed before saying, Gato must have sent them. Kakashi rose an eyebrow and said, Gato? You mean Gato of Gato Shipping Industries? Why would he put a bounty on you? It's because the bridge I'm building is the one thing that could break the grip he has on my country. Tazuna said. Explain. Kakashi said as he kept his stare on the man. Scene change. Shore of Land of Fire. Naruto stood on a tree next to a small dock as he looked out at the island that was barely visible to his eyes in his transformed state due to the mist that surrounded the island. It was a good thing no one was around. If they were, they would have seen one really big bird that could have been mistaken as a summon. It was mostly brown with 3 long and wide feathers that gave it the vague appearance of having hair coming from the top of its head and swooping down to the end of its tail feathers. The Pidgeot then looked upwards and spotted the clones that were transformed into wingulls as they flew around spying on the boats that were spread throughout the area running patrols. As the small long-winged birds flew around keeping an eye out for their ride to the island, Naruto considered just what he and the other Leaf Shinobi were getting themselves into. Tazuna had told them about how Gato had taken over the island nation's shipping industries, which was the blood of the people's economy. With a firm grip on those, Gato had been able to place himself as a tyrant over the people, taxing them into such a level of poverty that Naruto doubted he could really believe until he saw it for himself. Tazuna's bridge would open up a trade route to the Land of Fire that would effectively shatter Gato's hold on their country. Which would explain why Gato wanted the man dead as soon as possible. Naruto shook his head from those thoughts when one of his clones dispelled in the cover of a passing cloud. Their ride was on its way. Naruto turned around on the branch he was perched on before opening his wings and flying a short distance into the forest where the others were waiting. Landing in front of the small group, Naruto dropped his transformation and said, "The boat should be here in about 30 minutes. Kakashi nodded and said, "Do you think the patrol boats will be any trouble?" Naruto shook his head and said, "Not with how small our own boat is. The patrols seem to be more for stopping any of the boats that you could actually smuggle more than just a few people over with. We just need to time it right. Worst comes to worst and we do get spotted, I can send some exploding clones underwater and sink them." Kakashi frowned and said, "Let's try to avoid sinking any of them. It would defeat the purpose of sneaking in if we draw attention to ourselves." Naruto shrugged and said, "You're the alpha." 30 minutes later, the group met up with one of Tazuna's friends who was one of the few people who still had a boat and brave enough to actually use it. 5 minutes after that, Tazuna and the team was in the boat with Squirtle swimming beside the boat on one side and a clone transformed into a Swampert on the other. Overhead, an exploding shadow clone transformed into a Firo flew at a height that you would have to use a couple of sensory enhancement genjutsu to see. Since they were expecting a Junin to be around somewhere, Kakashi had asked Naruto if any of the Pokemon he could turn into could be hidden real well and be used for a sneak attack. Because they had some walking to do after they got off the boat, Naruto decided to go with a flying type, and Firo in his opinion was the best choice by far. Firo's had the best eyesight of any flying type and could stay up in the air for a long time without flapping its wings. It may not have been a peregrine falcon in a dive, but it would still work best for what they needed. I always thought of Firos as the Pokemon world's U2 spy planes. A giant shape soon appeared, surprising Kakashi, Sakura, and Sasuke at the size of the bridge. Naruto's jaw dropped as he looked at it. His clones had showed him an aerial view of the bridge, but it didn't do it an ounce of the justice that being right next to it on the water did. Naruto whistled lowly under his breath and said, "Damn. My clones had showed me an aerial view, but this is so much more impressive up close." Tazuna had a proud smirk on his face as he said, "Thanks, kid. This here is my super masterpiece. I have never built anything as super as this, and I doubt I will again for a long time if ever." Squirtle looked at the bridge, making its eyes widen, and turned to Naruto and said something that caused Naruto to chuckle. Seeing the confused looks on everyone else's faces, he said, "Squirtle says that he thinks a Groudon could walk on it and still have space on either side. He's wrong of course, but it's still impressive." Squirtle rolled his eyes in a whatever motion and took one last look at the bridge before focusing in front of him. Seeing them become even more confused, Naruto slipped Dex out and flipped it open and muted the speaker before searching through the index. When he came to the right entry, he flipped it around and everyone leaned in to see a picture of a truly colossal-sized Pokemon that had red armor plates over its brown body with yellow eyes and black spikes. The group then spotted the height and weight stats, and Kakashi's eye widened. The thing was bigger than a boss summon. Turning to his student, he said, "Naruto, can you turn into this yet?" Sasuke and Sakura studied him intently, with Sasuke ready to go into full mode, brooding if the dead last could turn into something so big. Luckily for all the non-emo people though, Naruto shook his head as he closed the Pokédex and said, "Not yet. It takes a ton of chakra to transform into anything that size. I mean, I probably could, but as I am now I would most likely knock myself out in the process." Kakashi nodded and relaxed a bit. He couldn't imagine the panic that would come from the villagers if Naruto ever transformed into something even remotely close to that thing's size. After the boat had traveled along the bridge for a short distance, it went through a tunnel that ended in a mangrove forest. As the boat pulled up to a dock, Naruto recalled Squirtle and dispelled the Blastoise clone as well. As it did, the Wingull clones all flew into the surrounding clouds and dispelled as well, giving Naruto their memories of the patrol boat routes. Shaking his head at the influx of so much information, Naruto looked up at where his Firo clone should be. Looking back down as Tazuna thanked his friend, Naruto got into formation and the group began walking towards Tazuna's house. As the group walked, mist wrapped around their ankles, causing them to slow down so that they could be sure of their footing. 15 minutes later, the mist began picking up even more before the group heard an explosion up ahead and saw a light red glow that died down almost instantly. Naruto frowned as he picked up the memories from his Firo clone. It showed it taking a dive when it spotted someone and exploding right on top of a figure with a really big sword just as it jumped out of the way. Turning to Kakashi, he said, "Tall man with black hair and a really large sword. I think he was able to get away." Kakashi frowned as well and said, "Everyone be on guard." Sasuke and Sakura each expanded their senses as Tazuna tensed even further than he already was. Naruto made a couple of clones who transformed into a couple of purple snakes with yellow bands. As the Ekans clones made their way through the forest, Naruto looked towards Kakashi, who nodded in approval. Looking back forward, Naruto stood up a bit straighter and mentally prepared himself for anything. The man that the Firo clone had attacked had been a real giant and looked extremely strong as well. 10 minutes later, the situation was really getting to Sakura and Sasuke, who were constantly trying to look around without seeming to. Tazuna was even worse, visibly sweating as the anticipation was killing him. Naruto was nervous as well, but at least he had a way of knowing where the man was beforehand. All of a sudden, one of his clones dispelled, causing Naruto's eyes to widen. "Everyone down!" Naruto yelled as he dove forward, followed by the others as Kakashi grabbed Sakura and Sasuke dragged Tazuna with him just before a large spinning blur went over them and slammed into a tree, revealing it to be a sword. The group looked up when a figure landed on the sword. It was a tall man with black hair and beady gray eyes, wearing blue pants and arm warmers that were in a cowhide pattern. His chest was bare except for two straps that crossed his chest in a X pattern, presumably used to hold the giant sword he was currently standing on. Naruto and Kakashi both saw the burnt leather on the man's left arm warmer and knew that this was the man who the Firo clone had tried to kill. Naruto then stiffened as his other clone popped, showing him a figure that was hiding in the woods. Naruto frowned as he kept himself from looking at where the clone had spotted the figure. Why was a hunter nin from the mist simply standing in a tree while a mist ninja, who was obviously a missing nin if the scratched headband was any indication, was in front of them? Well, Kakashi Hatake, the copy nin. This is an honor. Now I know why the demon brothers failed and where that exploding shadow clone came from. I don't assume that you would just hand the bridge builder over, would you? Kakashi and the others stood up as he said, "Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the mist. You guys stay back and guard the client, he's way out of your league." "Demon?" Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. "That's right. When he was still in the academy, he killed the entire graduating class." Naruto gave a low whistle as Zabuza grinned and said, "Ah, good times." As Kakashi walked past him, Naruto whispered, "Hunter nin in the forest," causing Zabuza to stiffen a little when he read his lips, wondering how the brat knew that. Kakashi nodded slightly and rose his headband, revealing his left eye as he said, "Something tells me I'm going to need to use this." "Oh, the Sharingan already? I'm honored," Zabuza said as he rose an eyebrow. Sasuke frowned as he heard this, wondering if his teacher was an Uchiha. "This should be entertaining," Zabuza said before he and his sword disappeared. As they looked around trying to spot the man, Sakura shouted out, "He's on the water." Everyone looked there to see the man doing a weird hand sign before the mist began thickening until no one could see more than a foot in front of them, causing the three genin to close up their formation even more. Naruto frowned before making a hand sign of his own. Sasuke and Sakura both stiffened at the sound of Naruto transforming but relaxed when they saw that it was their teammate. Naruto closed his eyes and used his new psychic senses to locate everyone. As he did, he sensed killing intent twice as bad as any the villagers ever sent his way and heard from the mist. There are 8 targets: throat, spinal column, lungs, liver, the jugular vein, the subclavian artery, kidney, heart. So many choices. Which vital target should I go for first? What's he doing? Sakura asked in a hoarse whisper. Trying to unnerve us. And doing a good job, I might add. The transformed Naruto said calmly as he locked onto the source of the voice before frowning as he sensed another figure appear right by the first that didn't feel human. On his other side, Sasuke was struggling to breath as their teacher matched the mist nin's killing intent with his own. Reaching into his kunai pouch, he shakily brought a kunai up to his own throat, ready to escape the sensation of pure fear he was experiencing. Sasuke, calm down. I won't let any of my comrades die, Kakashi said before he pulsed out his chakra, dispersing the mist a bit as Sasuke relaxed. Naruto sensed the second figure move quickly from its spot before hearing, "Too late." As Kakashi swore to himself and rushed to his students, Naruto's eyes snapped open and he spun, slashing the figure in half with the blades that were part of his arms that began at his fingers and ended a good foot past his elbows. The figure that looked like Zabuza looked at him in surprise for a moment before smirking and dispersing into water. "What on earth is that?" Zabuza asked, stopping his own charge at Kakashi in surprise as he saw for the first time what Naruto had transformed into. He stared at the man-sized, mostly green and white figure that had a purple triangle sticking out of its chest. Naruto turned back towards where Zabuza was as Kakashi skid to a halt next to him and smirked as he said, "A Gallade. A psychic-type Pokemon that's not afraid to get close and personal with its opponents. There's no way you can sneak up on us again." "Not bad, Naruto," Kakashi said over his shoulder as he walked towards Zabuza and took out a kunai. The two Junin then disappeared in blurs of speed as the genin and Tazuna heard the clanging sounds of metal on metal. After a while, Zabuza was able to kick Kakashi into the lake. As he surfaced, Kakashi thought, "This water is heavier than it should be. That means too late." Zabuza growled out as he appeared behind Kakashi, already doing hand signs. Water style. Water prison jutsu. As Kakashi became trapped in a sphere of water, Zabuza gave a dark chuckle and said, "Now to deal with those brats of yours." As a couple of water clones formed and began walking towards them, Kakashi shouted out, "Run! Take the client and get out of here. He can't leave from this spot and his clones can only travel a short distance away from the original." Naruto sighed as the clones made landfall and said, "Kakashi-sensei, do you really have such little faith in us?" Before Kakashi could say anything, Naruto was covered in smoke before a blue, yellow, and red blur shot out of the cloud through the two clones, who dispersed into water before it dived into the lake. "What the?" Zabuza said before a large figure burst out of the water underneath him and nearly ripped off his arm in its large jaw as he jumped away to avoid it. As Zabuza's hand left the sphere, it burst apart, leaving a soaking wet Kakashi, who looked at the top of the head that was now poking out of the water near him and staring intently at Zabuza. From what little he could see, Naruto had turned into some kind of alligator. Back on shore, Sakura looked on in amazement while Sasuke frowned in anger and thought, "The dead last keeps getting stronger. How? I'm the one who needs that kind of strength, not some clan-less nobody." Back with Kakashi and Naruto, the two were staring at Zabuza, who was fuming as well. As he looked at the blue creature that had a red mohawk-looking piece of skin on its head, he said, "Now what did the brat turn into?" The head snorted before Kakashi said, "Naruto, head back to shore. I'll handle this." The head snorted again before turning towards land. When it reached the shore, everyone got a good look at what Naruto had turned into. It looked like a large blue alligator with a yellow stomach and lower jaw that stood on its hind legs, which were larger around than its arms, showing that while it could move fast on all fours, it was mostly a bipedal creature. There were some bumps on its skin, making it look like it had pockets on its legs and arms, as well as a large jaw that looked like it could tear through even steel with ease. As it stood up, water dripped off of it, leaving it almost completely dry. The feraligator gave one last look at Zabuza before it dropped its transformation, revealing Naruto as he walked back to his teammates. "Now then, Zabuza," Kakashi said as he readied himself, "let's try this again. Oh, and by the way, that trick won't work on me a second time." Zabuza HMPHED before the two began a ninjutsu battle. But as Kakashi kept copying each of his jutsu, he became more and more frustrated. "You damn monkey, stop," Zabuza started. "Copying me." Kakashi finished, frustrating Zabuza even further. Growling, Zabuza made even more hand signs before stopping for a split second in the middle when he saw a shadow of himself behind his opponent. "What?" Zabuza asked with wide eyes before he heard, "Water style, water vortex jutsu." As the funnel of water blasted Zabuza towards shore, he thought, "He finished before me, how?" As Zabuza crashed into the trees, a pair of kunai dug into his arms, pinning to it and made him grunt in pain. Looking up at Kakashi, who appeared in a tree branch beside him, he said, Can you see the future?" "Why, yes," Kakashi said as he held up a kunai, "and yours is death." Two Senbon needles suddenly embedded themselves into the missing nin's neck, causing him to slump over farther. "About time," Naruto thought as he spotted the hunter nin on a branch of his own on the opposite side of the now dead body. Kakashi jumped down and checked for a pulse before looking at the figure. "He can't be any older than my students, and yet he's already a hunter nin. Impressive." As the hunter dropped down, he bowed and said, "Thank you for your help. I doubt I could have taken him by myself. Now, if you will excuse me, I have to properly dispose the body." Kakashi nodded, and the figure placed a hand on the body before making a one-handed hand sign and disappeared in a whirlwind of leaves. As the hunter nin left, Kakashi placed his headband back over his left eye and sighed before collapsing. "Kakashi-sensei," Sakura shouted out as everyone rushed over to him. Naruto checked his pulse and sighed in relief when he felt one before saying, "He's all right, just exhausted." The others nodded as Naruto placed his teacher on his back and gestured for Tazuna to lead the way. As Tazuna led them to his house, Sakura looked at Naruto and said, "Naruto, what was that last Pokemon you turned into? It seemed to be a lot faster than something that size should have been." Naruto chuckled and said, "It wasn't much faster than a normal crocodile or alligator, Sakura. People just don't realize how fast they can really be since they're usually pretty lazy. But to answer your question, it was a feraligator." Sakura nodded while Sasuke's frown lessened the barest hints, since Naruto had told them before that when transformed, he could only go as fast as the Pokemon could normally. "I will find out how you can turn into those creatures dead last. And when I do, I will finally be able to kill him." Naruto and his partners all watched the still form of Kakashi as he slept off the effects of overusing his transplanted Sharingan. Downstairs, Sakura was doing whatever she could to help the bridge builder's daughter, Tsunami, around the house while Sasuke merely sat out of the way brooding. Naruto sighed lightly to himself, catching his partner's attention. "I can't stop thinking that something isn't right here," Naruto thought before glancing at his partners. Frowning, he thought, "Why do I feel like something big is going to happen?" Naruto studied his partners for a moment and then said, "Guys, I think that we're going to have a fight on our hands soon, a big one. I also think we're going to need as much firepower for this one as possible. It's been just over a month now since I found you guys. Do you guys think you're ready to go to the next level soon?" The three Pokemon traded glances as they considered the question before turning back to their trainer, and as one nodded. Naruto nodded as well and said, "Then I guess tomorrow we'll start on getting you three ready to evolve." A groan brought their attention back to Kakashi, who was slowly lifting himself into a sitting position. "How are you feeling, Kakashi-sensei?" Naruto asked, prompting the man to slowly turn his head and tiredly study his student. "Like I ran 5 marathons against Guy," Kakashi said as he rubbed a hand against his face. Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, "Well, at least we took care of Zabuza. Although something's been bugging me ever since that fight. It's driving me crazy, to be honest." Kakashi sighed and said, "I think I know what it is that's bothering you." Can you please bring Sakura and Sasuke up here? Naruto nodded and stood up to leave. As he reached the doorway, he stopped and said over his shoulder, I'm glad you're awake, Kakashi-sensei. You really had us worried for a moment there when you collapsed like that. Kakashi nodded again as the blonde went out of the room to go collect his teammates. A minute later all three genin as well as Tazuna and his daughter who had come to check on the scarecrow Junin were sitting in the room around the man. Guys, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Zabuza's alive, Kakashi said short and to the point. What? But how is that possible? Sakura asked as Tazuna began looking afraid. It was that hunter nin, wasn't it? Naruto asked, now knowing where that feeling had come from. Kakashi focused on Naruto for a moment as he nodded his head before looking forward again and said, that's right. Something had been bugging me back there, but it's only now that I'm realizing what's wrong. For starters, hunter nin are supposed to destroy the bodies of their targets on the spot to prevent anyone from stealing secrets from the body. Yet that one took off with it. And then there was the hunter's choice of weapons. They could have been used to put Zabuza in a death-like trance that could have created a very convincing illusion of the real thing. Naruto frowned and said, how so, Kakashi-sensei? Kakashi took another glance at the easily most destructively oriented of his students and said, Senbon acupuncture needle weapons that shinobi hunter used can be deadly if they hit a vital spot. If not, the mortality rate is surprisingly low, and remember, they were originally designed as medical treatment tools. Shinobi hunters and all members of any village's corpse disposal squad must possess an intimate and thorough knowledge of human physiology. It would be simple for one of them to place a person into a near-death state. Kakashi glanced at his students and this time kept his gaze on them as he said, first of all, the masked boy went to the trouble of lugging off Zabuza's heavy carcass. Secondly, the acupuncture needles he used as weapons, while potentially deadly, can also be used to inflict non-mortal injury. These 2 points suggest that the kid's objective was to give the illusion of killing Zabuza, while rescuing him. And while things may be just the way they seemed, we have to consider this possibility as well. The genin and Naruto's partners all stiffened as Kakashi spoke. Tazuna then rose up a hand and said, aren't you just complicating things by overthinking them? Shinobi hunters are supposed to hunt outlaw shinobi, right? Before Kakashi could answer, Naruto shook his head and said, just because someone has a mask doesn't automatically make them legit. It would be easy to fake a mask if you aren't going to be thoroughly scrutinized. Or the kid could probably have taken the mask from a hunter nin that Zabuza might have killed while on the run. Kakashi nodded and said, Naruto's right, Tazuna. We have to be prepared just in case what I think happened really did. And if it did happen that way, then we have 1 week to get ready for Zabuza to recover from his near-death state. On that note, my students, I think it's time I up your training a bit. Naruto's eyes lit up at the prospect of some training as he said, so what are you going to teach us? That cool water walking trick you and Zabuza did during the fight. A D or C rank jutsu that almost everyone neglects using but has more than 20 ways of using it. Kakashi chuckled and said, easy there, Naruto. While it's true what I'm about to teach you is like what Zabuza and I did in our last battle, it is actually only the first step to being able to walk on water. What I'm going to be teaching you is called the tree climbing exercise. But Kakashi-sensei, we already know how to climb trees. We've known since we were 5. Sakura asked, a bit put down at what she thought was obviously going to be a waste of time. Sasuke didn't show it but was also a little put down. Naruto on the other hand. Tree climbing, eh? Sounds fun. Naruto said with a grin. It won't be fun for you. A small boy wearing a striped bucket hat as he stepped into the room. Everyone looked over at the kid and Naruto's grin grew as he said, says you. I'd rather be training than being stuck in a house all week. Tazuna smiled as well and said, Inari. Where have you been? Welcome home, Grandpa. The now introduced Inari said as he went over and hugged his grandfather. Inari, greet our guests properly. They're the esteemed ninja who brought your grandfather safely home. But mama, they're all going to die when they go against Gato, Inari said pointing at the genin. Naruto and Squirtle burst out laughing, surprising everyone while Bulbasaur narrowed his eyes at the kid. Charmander simply cocked his head in confusion. Squirtle stopped laughing and said something and Naruto said, you got that right, pal. Seeing the kid glaring at him while everyone else stared in confusion, Naruto said, Squirtle says that if we've managed to get this far then it will take a lot more than some midget who pays others to do his dirty work to bring us down. Inari glared and said, you're wrong. No matter what you do you'll just die out here. He then turned and rushed out of the room. Inari. Tsunami cried out and was about to go after him before Tazuna placed a hand on her shoulder and shook his head as she turned to him. Let him be. The bridge builder said softly. Kakashi slowly stood up and grabbed the crutches that Tsunami had put by his bed and said, let's go. The sooner we get started, the sooner we can finish. Scene change forest 15 minutes from Tazuna's house. Kakashi stood in front of his genin team as he explained what they had to do. Resting up against a tree was Naruto's partners as they waited for Naruto to learn what he needed to before creating a clone to do the tree climbing training so that they could work on achieving evolution somewhere else. Alright, listen up. This won't be any ordinary tree climbing. You're not allowed to use your hands. Naruto grinned and said, sounds pretty challenging. But how? Sakura asked as she and Sasuke looked at Kakashi like he was insane. Watch and learn, Kakashi said as he made the ram hand sign for a moment before turning around and began walking up the tree. Whoa, that's so cool, Naruto said with stars in his eyes as he began thinking of all the pranks he could pull with that skill. As Kakashi stepped onto the bottom of a branch and let out a small breath at the exertion the task put on his still recovering body, he said, that's it, in a nutshell. Focus all of the energy of your chakra toward the soles of your feet and use that power to cling to the trunk. When you have full mastery over your own chakras, this is the kind of thing you can accomplish. But, Master Kakashi, how will learning to climb trees this way make us any stronger? Sakura asked. Isn't it obvious, Sakura? Naruto asked, drawing everyone's attention to him as he walked over to a tree and placed his hand on it. Turning back to Sakura he said, doing this exercise will teach us how to properly monitor how we use our chakra. Once we know how to properly put enough chakra into our jutsu, we can use it more efficiently. Naruto's right, Kakashi said, drawing everyone's attention back to him as he continued, and there is a secondary objective which is to build up enough stamina necessary to complete your task once the chakra has been focused. If you think this looks hard, it's even more difficult to maintain your chakra when using ninjutsu. In battle, circumstances are constantly changing, and a true shinobi has to be able to manipulate and maintain his chakras on the fly, if he ever hopes to prevail. The time you need to just stand around trying to summon and control your own powers is a luxury you won't have. So while climbing those trees, you'll also be mastering skills that will probably save your lives. Kakashi then pulled out 3 kunai from his pocket and said, now, no more talk. It's time for action. The only way to learn is by doing. And Naruto, I want you to try this at least once by yourself before you make a clone to do it for you. I want to see how high you yourself can go on your first try. Naruto nodded and walked back to where his teammates were as Kakashi tossed the 3 kunai to the ground in front of his students and said, use the kunai blades to score the bark at the highest point you can climb to. It will serve as a reminder for later. Your goal is to make a mark on a higher spot each time you climb. Don't worry, I don't expect any of you to reach the treetop on your first try. A running start will probably give enough momentum for a good first effort. The genin bent down and picked up their kunai before facing a tree and made the ram hand sign as they concentrated. As he did, Naruto focused on the feeling of firmness that he had felt when he had his hand on the tree. Unknown to the others, Naruto had actually stuck his hand against the tree, testing it out a little before rejoining his teammates. The 3 genin opened their eyes and took off at the trees. As soon as they reached the base of the trees, Naruto focused completely on the task as he began climbing. He briefly registered Sasuke flipping off his tree a short distance from the ground and Sakura stopping at the lowest branch before he brought even that bit of focus back to the task at hand, concentrating on putting one foot in front of the other and maintaining his chakra flow. He made it about halfway up before he suddenly lost his focus enough for his chakra to spike, causing part of the bark to explode. Naruto reflexively jumped away, barely remembering to mark his progress with his kunai before bouncing against a nearby tree at an angle, aiming for another that he also bounced off of on his way down. Back near the ground, Sasuke was looking at Sakura in amazement while Kakashi said, well, so much for the great Uchiha. It seems that Sakura is the better when it comes to chakra control. Sakura blushed at the comment but then looked around and said, "Hey, where's Naruto? I would have thought he wouldn't have gotten more than 10 feet. Where indeed?" Kakashi asked before looking down the tree, seeing the blonde lose focus halfway up the tree and began bouncing against the other trees on his way down. Sakura and Sasuke followed Kakashi's glance upwards and their eyes widened as the blonde made his way down. As he reached the level that Sakura was, Naruto grabbed a branch and used his momentum to swing around it once before letting go and flew towards his partners in an arc before backflipping and landing in a crouch next to them. Squirtle and Charmander were cheering their trainer on while Bulbasaur smirked at him as he gave a short bow and said, "Thank you ladies and gents." Not bad Naruto. You made it halfway up on your first try. Kakashi said, honestly impressed even though he knew that Naruto had worked his clones' butts off on chakra control exercises when he first learned the Shadow Clone Jutsu to get his chakra control closer to his classmates' levels. Sasuke glared at the blonde as he turned around and nodded to Kakashi and said, "Thanks Kakashi-sensei. Do you mind if I make a clone and then go somewhere else to train my partners? I need to get them ready for evolution and the sooner we get started, the better." Kakashi nodded and said, "Sure Naruto. Just don't stay out too late." Naruto nodded again and quickly making a clone and handed it his kunai before gesturing to his partners and began heading deeper into the forest to hopefully find a clearing they could use. And if not, then it would be even more training for he and his partners to make one. Who knows, maybe Naruto could even finally figure out a way for him to use a Pokemon's attacks while transformed as they trained. Luckily, they found a clearing that was only about a half hour from where the other two genin and his clone were learning how to tree walk. Turning to his partners after he studied the area he said, "This will do. I'm going to create some clones for you to fight. We'll start off with you guys working as a team for a while and then move on to battles where you will be fighting each other and me in either 1-on-1s or 2-on-1s. In the meantime, I'll have a few other clones working on learning how to perform attacks. Sound good?" The three Pokemon nodded as the clones appeared filling the clearing. 10 of them took off into the forest to find more secluded areas while the rest split into groups waiting for the Pokemon to make the first move. Bulbasaur was the first to oblige as he took off running while launching barrages of Razor Leafs at each of the groups with Charmander and Squirtle on his heels launching their own ranged attacks as they moved to get in closer to use their close-range attacks while the clones tried to keep them away with the training kunai that they always used for practice. Naruto watched his partners and clones do battle for a moment as he leaned against a nearby tree before looking up at it. Grinning, Naruto took out a kunai and put it in his mouth as he took a few steps away from it. Naruto was then covered in smoke before a Cranidos shot out with the kunai still in its mouth and began rapidly running up the tree. As the small gray and blue dinosaur-like creature continued up the tree, Naruto thought, "Let's see how high I can get when transformed." Scene change. Tizuna's house. Tizuna's family and Team 7-Naruto's partners were sitting at the table eating dinner. Tsunami looked worried as she said, "Kakashi, shouldn't one of us go out to find your other student?" Kakashi shook his head and said, "Nah, Naruto will be back soon." Right on cue, the door to the house opened and then closed as Naruto and two clones came in carrying Naruto's partners who were asleep and looked like they had been through 3 separate wars in one day. "See?" Kakashi asked before turning around to face the lead blonde and said, "So how did training go?" Naruto grinned and said, "Pretty good if I do say so myself. They just need another day, 2 at most before they're ready and I've almost figured out how Pokemon do their attacks as well." "I see. That's good to hear," Kakashi said as he did his best not to think about the mayhem Naruto could unleash if he succeeded in learning how to perform Pokemon attacks while he was still in a phase where he would rather play a prank on someone to get revenge than work things out with the person. Naruto nodded and set Bulbasaur down on the floor as his hand became coated in a soft glow of bluish-green chakra before placing it along his partner's body, slowly healing the small bruises and cuts. On either side of him, his clones were doing the same with the other two. A minute later, the 3 Pokemon were healed and Naruto unsealed 3 apples for his partners from the storage scroll that he always kept on hand for them as his clones dispelled. Setting the apples down in front of them for when they woke up, Naruto then stood and took his own place at the table and began eating, not even caring that the food was a bit cold. As he took a bite out of his meal, Sakura frowned and said, "Hey Naruto." Naruto hummed before swallowing and said, "What is it, Sakura? How do you do that? You said it's not medical jutsu, but you use it to heal your partners. Heck, you even used it to revive that cat. So what do you do?" Kakashi studied Naruto in curiosity as well while Naruto considered his words as he took another bite out of his meal. Swallowing again, he said, "You know how I'm trying to learn how to perform Pokemon attacks while transformed, right?" Sakura nodded and Naruto said, "Well, I already figured out how to perform one. But unlike most Pokemon attacks, this one is a healing move called Synthesis. Think of it as a self-healing medical jutsu. Only I've modified it a little. I found that when I push my chakra into a wound while I'm using it that I can have the attack heal others. But for now I can only do minor wounds." Kakashi rose an eyebrow and said, "That's very impressive, Naruto. Though I must say I'm surprised you were able to learn how to do that move but can't do any others. I would have thought that it would have been easier for you to learn a few of the more destructive moves first." Naruto shook his head and said, "Believe me, it wasn't easy by any means. It took 1,000 clones working each day for a week to learn how to do that when I was transformed into a Pokemon that could do that move. It took me even longer to figure out how to do it untransformed, which is something I'm not planning to do for any other attacks since it would take way too long for the others if this one was anything to go by. It was actually the first move that I started trying to learn so that I could heal my Pokemon since there isn't a Poke Center around anymore which were like miniature hospitals for Pokemon. On another note, when I learned how to perform that move for one Pokemon, I found that I could use it while transformed as any other that could use it. So I just need to learn how to perform an attack as one Pokemon that can use it and I'll be good for the others. It's taking a while though and so far I'm stuck with only body type attacks which are really just adding regular chakra to do more damage when you use them." Kakashi nodded and said, "I see. But I thought you said you were going to tell me when you figured out how to perform Pokemon attacks. You've been healing your partners for more than 2 weeks now." Naruto shrugged and said, "I don't consider Synthesis an actual attack. And besides, anyone could tackle someone or scratch them with a claw-like weapon. Now launching a stream of fire without hand signs or even firing off a beam of ice, those are attacks." Kakashi sighed in defeat and said, "I hate how you can bend words like that. You can be worse than the council at times, you know that." Naruto chuckled and said, "Why do you think I have them sputtering each time they ever called for me?" Kakashi chuckled as well and said, "Indeed," before both went back to their dinner. Sakura looked confused for a moment before shrugging and going back to her own dinner. At his spot at the table Inari glared at them all before standing up and left the kitchen drawing a sad look from Tsunami. Scene change. Tizuna's bridge, the next day. Kakashi had asked Naruto to create some clones to help around the bridge and guard Tizuna. So the blonde was currently standing in front of Tizuna and the workers as he crossed his fingers and said, "Multi-shadow clone jutsu." The front of the bridge was covered in smoke before dispersing revealing 100 clones much to the surprise of the workers minus Tizuna. "All right, listen up," Naruto said gaining the clones' attention who had been looking around. "I want 25 of you to transform into Machops, 25 into Machoks, and 25 into Machamps. The rest of you transform into Blastoises." The clones nodded and made hand signs before that part of the bridge was once again covered in smoke. As the smoke cleared away again, the workers were shocked at what they saw. Each of the figures were blue with the last group having large brown shells covering their torsos. The others all looked like muscle builders with one group having 2 pairs of arms instead of 1. Naruto turned around and smirked at their faces as he said, "Poke Bridge Builders Inc. at your service. I figured you'd want some of them to be able to bring some of your people down to check the pillars of the bridge to Tizuna. They can also go underwater to check as well if need to. Also, all of them are at least 5 times as strong as most humans so you should have no problems. Well, me and my partners need to get to training now so I'll see you later." Tizuna nodded and thanked the blonde as he took off into the forest with his partners behind him. Tizuna then grinned as he looked at his new workers and rubbed his hands and said, "All right guys, that kid just gave us some free labor, let's put it to good use." The rest of the workers cheered before Tizuna began barking out orders. Naruto smirked as he looked at his partners who had proud smirks on their own faces as they looked back at him. Standing in front of him were 3 middle-level Pokemon who were still enjoying the feeling of power that came from the evolution process. Naruto's smirk turned into a proud smile as he remembered what happened earlier. Flashback. Scene: forest clearing 2 hours after leaving Tizuna's bridge. Naruto had decided that it would be more time efficient to simply create another training area a short distance away from the bridge. So once he and his partners were at a safe distance away from everything else, he had his partners let loose cutting down trees as he transformed into a scyther, as well as making 3 clones to aid in cutting down trees, leaving some trunks at various heights to add variety into the area that would soon become a training ground. The 3 Pokemon meanwhile worked as a team on the ground as they slipped into a procedure that they have done multiple times when Team 7 was given a mission to clear out a part of the forest near the village to build off of. Bulbasaur would launch multiple barrages of razor leaves at tree trunks, thinning them down to just a foot in thickness before Charmander would let loose with a flamethrower that would further weaken the tree. Once enough of the trunk was burned away, Squirtle would douse the flames before attacking the tree with a skull bash, sending the tree crashing down away from where their trainer was. Once the tree was down, Bulbasaur would trim off the branches and cut the tree into segments that Squirtle would roll out of the way using its water gun, while Charmander occasionally burned the roots of the stump enough for Bulbasaur to pull out as well once Squirtle had extinguished the fire. With Naruto, he did something similar, slicing through the tree with his transformed arms, sending the tree crashing to the floor before he began cutting the tree into segments. As he did this, a clone transformed into Scyther's evolved form, Scizor, would then use its claws to cut off the branches before another couple of clones transformed into Machamps would then haul the segments over to where the Pokemon were depositing their own segments. Now an area that once held proud trees was an area riddled with stumps that were at various heights that had their tops flattened to the point where someone could easily stand on them without too much trouble. Naruto glanced over the training area one more time before glancing over at the tree segments that were off to the side and frowned. It seemed like a waste to let all that wood just rot off to the side. Coming to a decision, Naruto created a group of 20 clones who instantly went to the logs and began preparing them for transport to the village, where Naruto was sure the villagers could find some use for them. Once that was out of the way, Naruto turned to his partners and said, "All right guys, let's get started. Free for all, no limitations. We don't stop until all 3 of you have evolved." The Pokemon nodded before as the 4 separated and began moving throughout the stumps, attacking each other in a dangerous game of war whenever they ran into each other. As Naruto moved through the maze of stumps, he heard the sound of steam being made as Squirtle and Charmander engaged each other before he suddenly had to dodge out of the way of a bunch of leaves that landed where he had been. Naruto looked around the stump that he was crouched behind before he had to quickly duck back as a smirking Bulbasaur let loose another barrage at him from his position on top of a tree stump. "If that's how you want to play it, then let's try this," Naruto thought before he made a hand sign and disappeared in a cloud of smoke that made Bulbasaur stiffen in anticipation for whatever the blonde transformed into. He was unprepared though when a Rhyhorn burst out of the smoke and around the stump before it rammed into the stump Bulbasaur had been standing on, sending the grass type flying. Before he could get too far though, Bulbasaur sent out his vines and wrapped them around the still running Rhino Pokemon's legs, causing it to trip as the green Pokemon pulled on its vines, intending to tackle the Pokemon while it was down. Right when it did though, the Rhyhorn burst into smoke, causing Bulbasaur to widen its eyes before a shadow appeared over him. Bulbasaur jumped out of the way, barely avoiding the Hitmonlee's foot that slammed into the ground before it was covered in smoke and a Hitmontop came out spinning. The fighting type quickly bared down on the grass type, who just as quickly launched its vines at a stump and pulled itself up just in time to dodge the transformed blonde as it shot forward and bounced off a stump as it continued on its way. Bulbasaur quickly decided that he wanted to fight something that wouldn't be constantly changing on him and shot his vines toward one of the larger stumps that were in range and quickly drew himself towards it to find one of his fellow Pokemon to fight against. Bad idea. As soon as he was close enough to the stump, Squirtle tackled his friend from behind another and the two began rolling around on the ground as they tried to come out on top. Charmander meanwhile was looking around another stump as he tried to get a drop on one of the others. His match against Squirtle had ended in a stalemate when the two had been covered in the steam from their two attacks meeting, allowing the turtle Pokémon to slip away undetected. Charmander then saw a spinning top come bouncing along the tree stumps towards him. Deciding to try his luck against his trainer, Charmander's tail began glowing as he waited. As soon as the Hitmontop was close enough, Charmander swung his tail hoping to trip the spinning Pokémon. The Hitmontop instead jumped over the Iron Tail attack and transformed while it was still in the air, causing Charmander to jump away from the blonde who had landed behind him. Charmander turned to face the blonde and opened his mouth, shooting out a smokescreen. As he was covered in the thick smoke, Naruto lightly cursed under his breath before a glowing tail suddenly appeared right in front of him and slammed into the blonde, shooting him out of the cloud to land painfully against the stump. Naruto barely had time to groan out in pain before he had to dodge the flamethrower that came out of the smokescreen. As the smokescreen dissipated, Charmander looked around trying to find his trainer. A large smoke cloud appeared on top of a stump behind him, drawing his attention as it dispersed, revealing a grinning Charizard, causing Charmander's eyes to widen. The transformed blonde gave off a roar before opening his wings and rushed toward the fire type, who quickly made his tail glow and spun to slam it into the flying lizard, who pivoted with its own tail glowing blue from the chakra running through it. The two tails slammed into each other, pushing the two combatants away with uneven forces. Charmander slid on the ground before stopping as Naruto flew through the air backwards before hitting a stump. As the transformed blonde slumped down, he dropped the transformation with a pained grunt. His attention was drawn back to his partner though when he saw the fire type began glowing. Charmander's form then began to shift into a larger one with the head angling back into some kind of horn. As the glow died down, revealing Charmander's evolved form, Dex's muffled voice sounded from Naruto's vest pocket as its sensors picked up the evolution. Charmeleon. Flame-type Pokémon. In the Rocky Mountains where Charmeleon live, their fiery tails shine at night like stars. Naruto smirked and said, "Booyah baby." The newly evolved Charmeleon opened his eyes and studied his form for a moment before he glanced up at Naruto when he shifted into a standing position. "Nice job, pal," Naruto said with a smile before his face took on a worried expression as the fire type suddenly grinned evilly at his trainer before he opened his mouth that began glowing. Naruto's eyes widened as he jumped away just as Charmeleon launched a fire blast at the shapeshifter. "Holy shit," Naruto shouted out as the five-pronged attack blasted straight through the maze before detonating against a tree. Turning back to his partner he said, "Now that's what I'm talking about." Charmeleon gave a proud smirk before turning his head in a seemingly random direction and motioned Naruto to follow him as he took off through the maze. As he followed his partner, Naruto frowned and thought, why is he acting more like Squirtle? Did evolution really change more than his form and power levels? I sure hope not. The two made their way through the maze until they found an interesting sight. Squirtle and Bulbasaur were for some reason having a strength contest, with Squirtle pushing against Bulbasaur's vines. Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, guys, what are you doing?" The two looked up at the blonde before their eyes traveled to Charmeleon and widened. Naruto smirked and said, "You guys just going to stand there, or are you going to try to evolve?" Charmeleon obviously had enough experience when he fought me. The two looked at each other for a moment before nodding to each other. Taking a few steps away from each other, they closed their eyes and concentrated for about a minute before both began glowing. Then as one their forms began shifting. Both grew in size as pointed appendages that Naruto could only assume were ears appeared on Squirtle's form as its tail became bigger. Bulbasaur's bulb seemed to grow taller before partially opening before fern-shaped leaves grew out under it. The glowing died down, revealing the two Pokémon's new forms before Dex once again spoke. Ivysaur. Seed-type Pokémon. When the bud on its back starts swelling, a sweet aroma wafts to indicate the flower's coming bloom. Wartortle. Turtle-type Pokémon. It is said to live 10,000 years. Its furry tail is popular as a symbol of longevity. Naruto's eyebrow rose at his water type's description before shrugging and smiled at the two as they studied their new forms. Charmeleon then stepped forward and took his place by his friends as Naruto smirked at them and said, "Good job guys." All three smiled at him before their eyes widened as 30 clones appeared behind Naruto and he grinned evilly before saying, "Ready for round 2. Scene change. Chizuna's house. Naruto strolled into the house with a wide grin on his face as he entered the kitchen. "You seem happy," Kakashi said, causing Naruto's grin to grow. "Naruto, where are your partners?" Tsunami asked, worried. "You mean these partners?" Naruto asked as 3 beams of light escaped from the Pokeballs on his belt and formed into his partners in front of him. "So that's their evolved forms," Kakashi mused as he studied the 3 Pokemon in front of him. Naruto nodded and said, "Yeah, and believe me, they're even stronger now than before. Now that they're at their middle levels, their attacks really pack a wallop now." "Doesn't matter," Inari mumbled at his spot at the table. Everyone focused on Inari as he glared at Naruto and said, "Why do you even bother? You're just going to die anyway when you go against Gato." Naruto cocked his head as he studied the boy in front of him and said, "Yeah, well, it's better in my opinion to go down fighting than just roll over and wait to die." Inari growled and said, "Listen to you. You make me sick, coming here and talking about fighting like you're some kind of hero when heroes don't exist. What gives you the right to come here not knowing anything and saying crap like that?" Ivysaur and Wartortle narrowed their eyes slightly before shaking their heads. Naruto merely rose an eyebrow and said, "What right do we have? I didn't know that we needed a right to help people." Turning to Sakura, he said, "Hey Sakura, did you know we needed a right to come here and help these people?" Sakura merely shook her head before Inari shouted out, "Stop talking crap. You have no idea what pain is. You probably don't want for anything in your village. I bet when you go home you'll go back to your parents and forget about this place, so why don't you just leave now?" "Inari," Tsunami said before vines suddenly wrapped around the boy and jerked him over to Ivysaur, who was glaring at him, causing the boy's eyes to widen at the intensity of the glare. "Ivysaur, let him go. He doesn't know what he's talking about," Naruto said gently. Once Ivysaur had let him go, Naruto said, "Inari, you don't realize how lucky you are. You still have your mother and grandfather. Me, I was born alone, an orphan the day I was born. I don't have a hug from a parent to look for when I get home. The only ones who share my home with me are my partners, and I didn't even have them until a little over a month ago. Instead of moping around throwing yourself a pity party and telling everyone they're going to die, you should be trying to figure out what you can do to make everything better like your grandfather is. Otherwise you'll never become anything more than a pathetic shadow of what you could have been. Think about it." Naruto then grabbed his plate and headed upstairs with his partners following him. As soon as the door upstairs closed, Inari stood up and took off out of the house. Tsunami began to get up, but Kakashi beat her to it and said, "I'll talk to him." Kakashi found Inari sitting on the dock looking out over the water. Sitting down beside him, Kakashi looked out over the water as well as he said, "Don't feel too bad about what Naruto said. He's had a pretty rough life himself. Being an orphan since birth is really only the tip of the iceberg for him. But he doesn't let it get to him. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen him cry. He must have one day just got tired of crying and decided to do the best that he could with his situation and work to improve it. Your grandfather is doing the same with the bridge he is building. And someday you'll have to choose what you'll do as well. I just hope you choose right." Kakashi stood up and headed back into the house as Inari pulled his knees up to his chest and thought, "Daddy, what would you do?" Scene change. Tizuna's bridge. The next day, the beginning of the bridge was once again covered by smoke as clones appeared and then transformed. Tizuna grinned from where he was standing beside Naruto and said, "At this rate the bridge will be finished in a week. I can't tell you how glad I am for your help on this, kid." Naruto smiled and said, "Don't mention it. I would actually make more clones, but I'm afraid there wouldn't be anything for them to do if I did." "True," Tizuna said before he noticed that some of the clones had transformed into Wingulls as they took to the sky. Looking to Naruto, he saw the blonde shrug as he said, "Better safe than sorry. They'll let us know if anyone comes, so that way the other clones don't have to keep an eye out while they work like they did yesterday." Tizuna nodded and Naruto and his partners began walking back to the training ground they had made. When they got there, they found the sight of a boy holding a basket frowning as he looked around the man-made clearing. "Something wrong?" Naruto asked, startling the boy as he turned to look at him before his eyes were drawn to his partners. The boy shook himself a moment later and said, "No, it's just that I come this way sometimes when I look for herbs. I was not expecting to see all these trees gone. Whoever did the cutting though could use some more practice in being consistent. Naruto chuckled and said, not really, we cut them that way on purpose. It makes training more interesting when you have more than just a plain field to work with during a fight. I see, the boy said as he looked around at the clearing again. I take it you're a ninja then. I don't think anyone else would train to be able to fight at varying heights like this. Naruto rose an eyebrow at the observation but said, I am. Oh, my name's Naruto by the way. These are my partners, Ivysaur, Charmeleon, and Wartortle. The Pokemon each nodded to the boy when their trainer introduced them and the boy returned the nods before saying, Haku, nice to meet you. Naruto nodded before he said, you said you were going to collect herbs, right? You want some help? Haku smiled and said, thanks, I would like that. Haku led the four into a small clearing and showed Naruto what he needed. As he picked one of the plants, Naruto said, so what are these for anyway? Haku paused for a moment before saying, it's for a very precious person of mine who was injured recently. Ah, Naruto said as he picked one last herb before walking over and putting his load in the basket followed by his partners. Thank you, this should be plenty. Haku said, glad we could help. See you around Haku, Naruto said before he began walking back to his training field with his partners falling into step on either side of him. Naruto, Haku said, causing Naruto and his partners to stop and turn back around. Yes, Naruto asked. Haku studied the blonde for a moment before asking, do you have anyone precious to you? Naruto cocked his head in confusion and said, anyone precious to me? Haku smiled and said, someone who you would do anything for to keep that person safe. Naruto smiled as well as he looked down at his partners and knelt down to rub Wartortle and Chameleon's heads who leaned into the contact. Looking back up at the other boy he said, well, for starters there's my partners here. And then there's Iruka-sensei and the old man. Haku smiled again and said, then you must be truly strong. Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, what do you mean by that? I believe that it only when you have someone precious to you are you truly strong. Naruto smiled again and said, a good philosophy to have. See you around Haku. Naruto turned around and began walking again while calling over his shoulder, tell Zabuza to get well soon. I still haven't found anyone I can fight with that has a sword and I'm looking forward to finally fighting one. Haku's eyes widened as the blonde disappeared into the forest. He knew. The next 2 days passed quickly for everyone. Sasuke was nearly to the top of the trees while Sakura was now guarding Tazuna for one day as Kakashi's replacement before going back to tree climbing to build up her stores the next day. Thanks to Naruto's clones, the bridge was way ahead of schedule. Naruto himself though had been the most productive of those days. Now that his partners had evolved, the four poured their entire focus into finding a way for the blonde to be able to pull off a Pokemon attack. And the second day they succeeded with surprising results. Scene: cliffside 10 minutes before sunset. Naruto and his partners were currently standing at the edge of a wide cliff as they looked out over the ocean as they waited for their audience. You wanted to see us, Naruto? Naruto turned when he heard his sensei's voice as his shadow clone that had brought his team and the bridge builder's family dispelled. Naruto nodded and said, yeah, there was something I wanted to show you guys. You know how I said that if I learned an attack for one Pokemon, I could do it for any other that could also do that attack? Everyone nodded and Naruto continued, well, me and my partners found something else that I can do once I learn an attack. But for you to understand what that thing actually means, you have to know about what I call attack chains of evolution. Various basic attacks that have what I call chains that describe the path the attack evolves along. Take the electric style move Thunder Shock for instance. The Pokemon that uses it must learn how to first use that attack and then once it has enough experience can learn how to perform Thunder Wave, then after that Thunderbolt, and finally after enough practice with that Thunder which is at the end of that particular attack's chain. Are you with me so far? Most of the others nodded while Sasuke said, get to the point dead last. Naruto's partners glared at the Uchiha while Naruto himself simply shook his head and continued like he hadn't heard him. Earlier today, my clones and I were able to learn another basic move that has a chain of evolution called Ember. It's the first fire attack that most fire types learn. Now this is where things get interesting. Normally a Pokemon would have to spend days at least after they mastered the first link of the chain before they could even hope to get the attack of the next level off properly. But when I was finally able to do Ember after a month of trying with hundreds of clones, I found that I could do the next level, Flamethrower, no more than an hour later, and I hadn't even been using my clones yet. So, Sasuke asked, annoyed that the blonde was taking so long and wasting his time. Kakashi meanwhile was slowly putting together what Naruto was saying, and he was not sure if he liked where this was going. Naruto studiously ignored the emo again as he said, I had a theory about why I could learn how to perform a higher link faster than the first link, but I had to test it. So once I was comfortable with using Flamethrower, I started figuring out how to do the attack that is what you could call a side-by-side link in the chain, Fire Spin. I ended up learning how to do that attack in about a half hour, and that really confused me. I don't know why, maybe it was because the attack was at the same level as Flamethrower, but there was no way I should have been able to learn how to control an attack that creates a burning tornado around an opponent that fast. But that's not what's important. What is when I decided to go for the final link, Fire Blast. I ended up learning it in 20 minutes flat. It seems that for some reason, whenever I finally learn an attack that has a chain of evolution, I can learn the next level faster than the one below it. I think it has something to do with the fact that these attack chains are like chakra control exercises that you build off of. Once you get the hang of the basic ones, the ones that come after that are a lot easier to get the hang of. Kakashi's eyes widened as he suddenly realized why Naruto had seemed so excited since he began talking. Naruto, how many of these attack chains are there? Dex's voice came from Naruto's vest. Last count of attacks that were linked to each other by the need of experience in how to perform one attack to learn another were at 18. It is unknown if there are others, although it is assumed that unknown chains do exist. Naruto spoke up again and said, these chains are the main attacks that Pokemon use. If I can figure out how to perform the first links of all those chains in the same time frame as the Ember link, I'll have most of the battle-oriented attacks down in a little over a year. I see. That's fairly impressive, Naruto. But why couldn't you have told us all of this at the house? Kakashi asked. Naruto grinned and said, because I thought you guys would want a demonstration. Wartortle and Ivysaur walked to the side of the group as Naruto and Charmeleon turned to face the ocean again. Naruto then crossed his hands and 27 clones joined the two with plenty of space between them before all of the blondes were covered in smoke, revealing every single fire type in the Pokédex that Naruto could currently turn into except for his partner. At this point they can't go legendary yet. Also, for those wondering, I intend to see if I can work in the next generation of Pokemon from Black White at some point in the future. I have to get the game first and play it a bit so I know what to put in. Most likely would be done during the time skip. The fire types then as one opened their mouths and shouted out, Fire Blast. 5-pronged stars of fire shot out of Charmeleon and the transformed blonde's mouths and flew out in front of them for 100 yards before dissipating. I stand corrected. That's very impressive. Good job, Naruto, Kakashi said as the fire types turned around with proud smirks before the clones disappeared in puffs of smoke and the original dropped his transformation. Thanks, Kakashi-sense. I'm just glad I can finally do even one of a Pokemon's attacks. As the others began talking to the blonde about how impressed they were with what Naruto had did, Sasuke frowned in jealousy and began walking away. The dead last keeps getting stronger. I have to figure out how he does these things. I refuse to be outdone by some clan-less idiot. Team 7 along with Tazuna and his family stood in front of the bridge staring at the mist that was on the bridge. Kakashi had decided that it was too risky leaving Tsunami and Inari at home alone since Gato could send someone to kidnap them while the ninja fought, and so had brought them with the plan that Naruto would be keeping them safe with a platoon of transformed clones at a safe distance away from any fighting at the beginning of the bridge where Kakashi could know if anything happened to them. Kakashi turned to Naruto and gave a nod, telling the blonde to begin the plan that they had came up with. Naruto gave a nod of his own before he crossed his fingers and called out, Shadow Clone Jutsu. Puffs of smoke appeared all around the group as a whole platoon plus 2 clones appeared before Naruto released his Pokemon. Turning to them, as the platoon began transforming into various fire types, he said, keep them safe, guys. His partners gave nods before the last 2 clones as well as the original made hand signs of their own and became covered in smoke as well. When the smoke cleared, the two clones were shown to have turned into a pair of dragon types called Flygons with red covers over their eyes. The original Naruto was transformed into a Gallade just like he had the previous time. Taking a deep breath, the psychic type then focused its senses on the bridge and picked up two presences. Turning his head to Kakashi, Naruto said, "They're here, Kakashi-sensei." Kakashi nodded and turned to Sakura and said, "Sakura, after Naruto's clones finish their attack runs, I want you to stay here with Tazuna and his family." Sakura nodded and Kakashi motioned to Naruto's Flygon clones to continue with their plan. The two dragon types nodded before switching to viewing in the infrared spectrum and launched themselves into the mist. POV FLYGON 1. Me and my brother had a fairly simple mission: test the waters. The original knew that Flygon had two different types of visions: regular vision like humans saw and infrared vision, and so we were going to be testing how well Zabuza and Haku could fight in their home field environment before we took it away from them. As we switched to heat vision and saw the two profiles, we flapped our wings and took off into the mist ready to see just how ready those two were. Apparently they had pretty good ears because we saw Haku move and we both climbed to avoid the Senbon needles that he had thrown at us. My brother kept climbing for about 10 feet before breaking off and heading to the side to go for an attack run, and I quickly did the same, going the opposite direction. We were able to coordinate our runs properly and both let out flamethrowers from opposing sides. However, as we came around for another pass, I noticed what appeared to be solid slabs of cold was shielding the two from the brunt of the flames. Before I could figure anything else out about it though, I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my side before I felt nothing else. Normal POV. The original frowned as he not only sensed his Flygon clones dispel but also got their memories from their runs as well. Turning to Kakashi he said, "Haku got them. They tried using flamethrower but he used some kind of jutsu to block them." Kakashi nodded before saying, "I see. Guess we'll have to do this the hard way then. You and Sasuke will have to deal with Haku while I handle Zabuza. Do you think you could clear up all this mist from here?" Naruto smirked as he dropped his transformation and said, "I can't. But I know someone who can." Turning to Charmeleon, he said, "Charmeleon, sunny day." The fire type nodded its head before it looked towards the sun and concentrated. Nothing seemed to happen for a moment before the sun seemed to get brighter and the mist began to burn away, earning a raised eyebrow from Kakashi and astonished looks from everyone else but Sasuke, who was glaring at the Pokemon. At the end of the bridge, shouts of surprise could be heard before Kakashi motioned to Naruto and Sasuke to follow him. It was time to finish this. As the three shinobi from the Leaf started walking down the bridge to fight the two missing Mist Nin, Naruto briefly pictured himself transforming into a psychic type again and just knocking the two out by knocking their heads together with a gesture, causing him to chuckle as an image of a Mewtwo with its arm raised and a blue shell around the two came to mind. Sadly, Naruto wasn't quite up to speed when it came to using psychic abilities to that extent yet. That in mind, Naruto quickly decided that his best bet was to go with a rock type on this one, since Haku obviously favored using Senbon needles. As soon as that thought finished crossing his mind, Naruto made a quick hand sign and was covered in smoke before a Pokemon walked out, earning a raised eyebrow from Kakashi and a glare from Sasuke. Naruto was now big, mean, and green. As a Tyranitar he stood at 6'7" and weighed approximately 445 pounds. Anyone trying to get in a fight with him was asking for trouble, and that wasn't counting the fact that Tyranitar was capable of using a couple of fire-type attacks either. As the three Leaf Nin caught sight of the two Mist Nin, Naruto saw Haku and Zabuza stiffen at the sight of him and smirked. This was going to be good. "Well now Zabuza, imagine meeting up with you here," Kakashi said once the two groups were relatively close. "Cut the crap, Kakashi," Zabuza growled as he took a quick glance at the transformed blonde before continuing, "We both know that I was going to be here today. Tell me, was it you or that brat over there who sent those flyers at us just now?" "What's it matter to you?" Kakashi asked with a raised eyebrow. "I might be willing to make you a deal. Give us the kid to take with us and we'll leave the old man alone. He could come in handy in my ambitions." Kakashi frowned and said, "I'm afraid I can't do that. Not only is he my responsibility as my student, but the Hokage is pretty fond of him as well." "That's too bad," Zabuza growled out. Sasuke meanwhile was furious. "I'm the one who should be sought after, not the dead last. I am an Uchiha, an elite. Sasuke began walking forward and said, "Dead last, you better not get in my way." Everyone rose an eyebrow before Zabuza began chuckling and said, "So the brat believes he is a shinobi, eh? Haku, why don't you deal with him first?" "Very well, Zabuza-sama," Haku said. Kakashi wasn't having any of that. "Sasuke, stick with the plan." The Uchiha turned from where he had been walking towards the fake hunter Nin and glared at his sensei and said, "Screw you, Kakashi. I'm going to prove why we Uchihas are the elites." Kakashi's eye narrowed, but before he could reprimand his student, Sedimo turned back around and ran toward Haku, who did the same. Naruto was about to ask Kakashi if he should step in as well or let the prick be shown his place first when Zabuza began rushing towards the Junin as well, trying to take his head off with his huge blade, and the two were off fighting as well. Naruto simply sighed and decided to wait and watch, to step in if need be for either fight. Sasuke vs Haku. As the two boys rushed towards each other, Sasuke pulled out a kunai from his pouch while Haku pulled out a Senbon needle, and the two began swiping at each other rapidly for about a minute before locking blades in a contest of strength. As the two pieces of metal shook from the strain, Haku said with a smirk in his voice, "You may be able to keep up with my speed for now, but I'm afraid that won't last for long. I had already set the stage for 2 attacks before we even begun." Sasuke's eyes narrowed and he said, "What the hell are you talking about?" Haku's head jerked to 2 puddles of water that was nearby, that was from his jutsu from the Flygon attack runs, and said, "There's water lying around us and I already have one of your hands occupied preventing you from using jutsu." Raising his free hand into hand signs he continued, "While I do not have that problem. Water style. 1,000 water needles of death." The surrounding water rose before separating into needles, and Sasuke's eyes widened as they reoriented themselves to attack him. Haku quickly disengaged as the needles shot at their target, while Sasuke's eyes widened before narrowing as he focused chakra into his legs and shot up into the air before the needles could turn him into a pin cushion. As Haku tried to figure out where Sasuke went, Naruto was looking up at Sasuke in the air and thought, well, at least he took something away from Kakashi-sensei's lessons. Haku suddenly heard the sound of shuriken approaching from above him and backflipped away from where Sasuke threw them at him, only to nearly run into Sasuke's kunai from when he had used his speed to try and get the drop on the fake hunter Nin. "He's fast," Haku thought as he quickly blocked with a Senbon needle before Sasuke backhanded him, sending him flying. Sasuke smirked arrogantly and said, "I'll admit that you're fast. But I'm faster." Haku merely cocked his head before he made one-handed hand sings again. The water once again rose up, but this time, instead of forming needles, they began forming thin slabs. Where Naruto was standing a short distance away, his eyes widened as the infrared images of 2 cold rectangles that his Flygon clones had spotted suddenly made sense now. Naruto began paying even more attention than he had been to the fight, since things were beginning to pick up even more speed, it seemed. Ice style. Demon crystal ice mirrors. Meanwhile, Sasuke was completely caught off guard when the mirrors quickly surrounded him in a dome, although he wasn't too worried about them. After all, what could a few mirrors do besides show how good-looking he was? Scoffing at Haku, who had quickly walked into one of the mirrors earning a raised scaled eyebrow from Naruto, the Uchiha said in an arrogant tone, "And just what exactly are these supposed to do against me?" Haku simply rose a hand up that held Senbon needles up as images appeared in all the mirrors and said, "You shall see." Kakashi vs Zabuza. Kakashi was having a bit better luck against Zabuza. With Chameleon's sunny day still up, Zabuza couldn't use his hidden mist jutsu to play predator hide and seek, and so, like their students, the two were constantly clashing at each other with their weapons of choice, with the occasional jutsu every once in a while. As Kakashi dodged an overhead strike of Zabuza's ridiculously large blade and jumped out of the way, he risked a glance over and noticed the dome of mirrors with Sasuke in them and Naruto just standing to the side. What is Naruto thinking? Oh well, maybe if Sasuke gets a little bruised before he steps in, it'll teach him a little humility. Right after that thought was finished, he jerked his head down to avoid the horizontal swing Zabuza took as said former Mist Nin growled out, "Better focus, Kakashi. I'm your opponent, remember, although I do have to wonder why your other student isn't helping that arrogant one. I didn't think you Leaf Ninjas had the heart to teach your wannabe ninjas lessons out in the field that way." Kakashi managed to shrug as the two locked blades and said, Naruto always was one to do things differently. Zabuza rose a hairless eyebrow before adding more pressure for the briefest of moments before jumping back in an attempt to upset Kakashi's balance as he ran through a chain of hand seals and called out, "Water style, Water Dragon Jutsu." The water dragon rose from the water under the bridge and rushed towards Kakashi, who had stumbled, but before it could wash the scarecrow away, a shout of "Flamethrower" rang out and a stream of fire impacted the dragon, causing it to die out in a quick cloud of steam. "What?" Zabuza shouted before turning to see the transformed blonde turning back from their battle with a shadow clone out that was already halfway to his sensei, who had obviously been the one to fire the attack. Once the clone reached Kakashi, it said, "You all right there, Kakashi-sensei?" Kakashi nodded and said, "Yeah, thanks for the assist, although I would have probably been fine, still glad for it. Think you could turn into something that could move a little bit faster?" The clone cocked its head and said, "Sure thing. But should I focus on blades or fire attacks?" Kakashi rose an eyebrow before he remembered the Gallade the original had turned into before and said, "If you think you can handle a sword fight, then go with blades. I don't want to have to be constantly hopping around flames if I can help it." The clone nodded and made a hand sign before being covered in smoke, causing Zabuza to stiffen. However, while both Junin were expecting to see the green, purple, and white colors of a Gallade, they were surprised to instead see the brown and white colors of a new rock-water hybrid that Naruto had never shown the others before. The Pokémon stood at a height of 4'3" with a broad arrow-shaped head and a white chest that gave the false impression that it was padded instead of firm. Its arms were weirdly shaped, having no hands but looking like a pair of scythes. Its legs ended in 2 toes and reminded the 2 Junin of a praying mantis legs. "What on earth is that?" Zabuza asked as his eyes widened. The clone seemed to smirk before it said, "Kabutops, a water-rock hybrid-type shellfish Pokémon that went extinct way before the others did." The clone then blurred as it shot forward and Zabuza barely brought his decapitating blade up in time to block the clone's swing. Sparks flew as the blade from the sword clashed with the transformed clone's arm blade before the other clone's arm came in and nearly took Zabuza's head off before the man jumped away. As he did, the man began cursing under his breath. Things were beginning to look bad and the original still hadn't made any actual moves yet. And then Kakashi stepped in, making his problems even worse with a low-powered Grand Water Dragon of all things slamming into the former Kiri Anbu while he was still in the air. As Zabuza slammed into the bridge, he was pushed along until he hit a pile of I-beams while Kakashi kept chakra pouring into the technique to keep the man pinned down in hopes to drown the man before, to his surprise, the clone jumped right up and into the rushing water and shot off towards their opponent. With Zabuza, he was trying to push himself into a position to get out of the torrent of water when he saw a figure coming at him through it at rapid speeds. Before Zabuza could do more than widen his eyes, the figure resolved into the Kabutops and slammed its arms into Zabuza's shoulders, pinning the man to the I-beams and forcing the man to open his mouth in a scream of pain, letting out a gasp of air. Zabuza glared at the clone as he tried to lift his arm with his sword to swing at it. The clone noticed Zabuza's sword arm twitch and its eyes narrowed before it jerked its arms down, completely tearing apart the demon of the mist's lower shoulders. Zabuza let out another scream into the torrent of water that was still pushing against them before kicking the shellfish Pokémon away. As the hybrid type reoriented itself, Kakashi reached the point of too little chakra to maintain his jutsu and so dropped the jutsu and saw the damage the clone had did. As both Junin panted a little to get their breath, the Kabutops was already moving to finish the job when they heard clapping coming from end of the bridge near where all the water had just returned to the ocean. Meanwhile, back near Sasuke vs Haku, Naruto had made it a point to keep an eye on both fights, so when Zabuza had started running through hand signs and Kakashi had stumbled, his hands were already in the necessary position as well. Pushing chakra into the hand sign, the clone instantly appeared and let loose its flamethrower attack, and Naruto nodded his head as he returned his attention back to the ice dome where Sasuke was currently being turned into a pin cushion. His clone would be able to tell him if he needed to do more to help his sensei. Right now, Sasuke would probably be the one who needed the most action from the original. At first, Naruto had been worried that Haku would just kill Sasuke with a needle straight to the neck, but it seemed that Haku's nature wouldn't allow him to finish a fight that way. Wasn't stopping the boy from enjoying turning the arrogant prick into a pincushion though, and Naruto had to admit that he was secretly enjoying it as well. He would step in if with a quick replacement if things got too out of hand though. A memory from one of Naruto's clones dispelling caused his head to twitch over towards Tezuna's house momentarily before he began chuckling. It seems that Kakashi was right to have Tezuna bring his family so that the three could wait at the foot of the bridge. Naruto's clones had apparently just taken out two of Gato's henchmen in a pretty funny way. Gotta love a Jinx's kiss. Naruto thought to himself as he received the memories of the clone that dispelled, telling him that the swordsmen were currently tied up tighter than a rope at a knot-tying convention and in one of the villagers' houses, with the villagers discussing what to do with them. Tezuna's house 10 minutes ago. The door to the house was suddenly sliced to pieces as the two swordsmen appeared in the doorway, drawing a gasp from the woman that they thought was Tsunami when she saw them. "Old man, Tezuna's daughter, right? Sorry, but you're coming with us," said the man with the cap as he began walking forward. As the two men entered the kitchen they heard, "Mama, what's going on?" They turned to see Inari and smirked, and the one with the eye patch asked, "Should we grab him too?" The other shook his head and said, "We only need one hostage." A sudden popping sound of smoke grabbed both swordsmen's attentions though, and they turned back to see Tsunami, covered in smoke. "What the?" was the only thing the two could get out before the man with the eye patch's face was grabbed by a short woman with straw-like hair and a purple face and kissed on the lips before his face turned purple and he fell unconscious. His partner barely had time to put his hand on his sword before he was spun around by the transformed Inari, and met the same fate. The two transformed clones then dropped their transformations and began tying up their prisoners for transport to hand over to the villagers. "I got this idea from the first season of Pokemon when the gang went to the North Pole to help Santa. A Jinx there kept kissing Brock and his face would always turn purple before he would pass out." Back with Sasuke vs Haku. Sasuke was currently still trapped in the dome of ice mirrors that Haku had put him in. Senbon needles were currently sticking out all over him and he felt like crap, but he was starting to slowly but surely figure out the technique he was caught in. "You should give up. I don't want to kill you," Haku said from his position in the mirror in front of the emo. "Shut up," Sasuke shouted at the masked boy. "I'm an Uchiha. We are the elites. We cannot be beaten." Haku cocked his head before images once again appeared in all of the mirrors and the needles flew again, riddling the so-called elite with even more needles. Haku was about to say something to contradict the elite statement when Naruto did it for him. "Hey Sasuke, you look like you could use some rest. Want to tag?" Sasuke's eyes bulged before he looked over at the transformed figure and shouted out, "No. Stay out of this, you dead last. This is my fight. You hear me? Yeesh. Alright already. I just thought you could use a little help, that's all," Naruto said. Behind his mask, Haku smirked and thought, "That arrogant fool, he should have let Naruto help him. Now I can simply take my time and continue turning him into a human porcupine." Once again needles flew and Sasuke fell to the floor, inadvertently pushing some of the needles in his front and further earning a low-pained groan from him. "So much for the Uchihas being the elites," Haku said as he raised his hand ready to send another barrage down. Sasuke growled when he heard that and began slowly lifting himself up. But just when the next wave of needles were about to hit the still rising Uchiha, they all suddenly turned into pink balls with hands and feet that were just under 2 feet tall with blue eyes that all dog piled into him, sending him back to the ground with an indignant cry of pain from having more of the needles pressed into his body. That was the last straw for the Uchiha and he passed out to blissful unconsciousness underneath the pile of Jigglypuffs. Haku meanwhile was staring at the now giggling fluff balls who were still piled up on the Uchiha's body before he was brought out of his shock by the sound of one of his mirrors nearly shattering. As Haku's head jerked over to the mirror where the original Naruto was, he saw that the mirror was almost completely destroyed by the punch the Tyranitar body produced. As the mirror began repairing itself using Haku's chakra, the ice user heard the blonde mutter, "Oh no you don't, flamethrower." The last part was shouted out and a stream of fire slammed into the mirror for a moment before dying down, revealing that while it was still there, it was just barely. Naruto reared back his arm and let fly another punch and completely shattered the mirror as it tried to repair itself and walked through before the mirror began to reform itself. As Naruto walked into the dome of ice mirrors, he glanced over at the pile of Jigglypuffs and said, "Alright guys, I know he's comfortable, but you've got a job to do." Haku smirked behind his mask as the Jigglypuffs, Ah, ed before making hand signs and were covered in smoke. Once it cleared, it revealed a dome of matangs covering the Uchiha's unconscious body with their arms pointing outwards at the ice mirrors. Haku noticed that there were a considerably smaller number of clones than before but just figured that Naruto had dispelled the clones that he hadn't needed. Naruto nodded when he saw that the Matang dome was in place and said, "Now then Haku, we can do this the easy way, or the hard way." Haku frowned behind his mask and said, "I'm sorry Naruto. But I must obey Zabuza's orders." Naruto sighed and said, "I was afraid of that." Fire blast. The five-pronged star of fire shot out of Naruto's mouth and slammed into the mirror that Haku had been in, leaving absolutely nothing left as the intense heat melted even the concrete underneath. As the fire raged on, one of the other mirrors shimmered before water shot out and slammed into Naruto's side, earning a grunt from Naruto as the water shifted him a bit before he opened his mouth and let loose a flamethrower into the water stream, turning it into steam that quickly blew away. As Haku's image appeared in the rest of the mirrors that he still had while the other two began to reform, Naruto said, "Just give up Haku. I can go at this all day." "I already said that I can't," Haku said before launching a Senbon needle towards Naruto's head, aiming for the eye, which was the only soft target on a Tyranitar's body. Naruto merely turned his neck and the needle bounced off of the hard skin over the eye. Naruto sighed and said, "I didn't want to do this Haku, but since I really don't want to be here all day, you give me no choice." Shadow Clone Jutsu. When the smoke cleared, Haku was looking at one Tyranitar for each of his mirrors. There was even one standing on the top of the Matang Dome. He was starting to get nervous when each of the large Pokemon rose their hands into hand signs and all called out, "Transform." The clones and original were all covered in smoke, but before it could clear and reveal what he had turned into, Haku heard shouts come from each smoke cloud. Fire spin. Blasts of fire shot out of the smoke cloud before wrapping around the ice mirrors, turning into fire tornadoes that began melting them after a minute, with Haku trapped in one of the higher mirrors. Thinking quickly, he rushed out of the mirror and through the flames, hoping to be able to put out any fire that his clothes caught once he got through, only to be tackled by the original Naruto while he was in the air. As the two landed on the ground with Naruto on top of Haku keeping him down with his front paws, he was able to get a good look at what Naruto and his clones had turned into as they stopped their technique, leaving nothing but steam. Naruto was currently a 6'3" orange dog with black tiger stripes and burnt orange-white fur that covered his chest and most of his head, leaving only his eyes and ears orange. Tufts of fur behind his legs gave it the slight appearance of his legs being on fire, and his tail that was kept bent looked to be almost as long as his body. The Arcanine on top of him growled and said, "Enough Haku. I don't want to fight you either, so knock it off." Before the ice user could say anything though, they heard clapping coming from the uncompleted end of the bridge. Everyone on the bridge looked over towards the unfinished end of the bridge and saw a short man who had his arm in a cast clapping while a large group of about 100 to 200 thugs stood behind him. The man stopped clapping and sneered at Zabuza and said, "Some demon of the mist you turned out to be, Zabuza. Couldn't even handle one Junin and that creature of his. More like baby of the mist if you ask me." "Gato, what is the meaning of this?" Zabuza asked as he stood up a little woozily from the blood dripping from both shoulders. Gato smirked and said, "Isn't it obvious? I'm here to finish what you couldn't. Oh, and by the way, I never intended to pay you anyway. Why pay so much for a missing nin when you can just hire a bunch of thugs to kill them after the job is done for a fraction of the price? Still, even they aren't the cheapest, so do kill a few before going down, won't you?" Turning to where the Arcanine pack was, Gato said, "Hey Pooches. Go ahead and eat that brat. It'd be good payback for breaking my arm." The original carefully got off Haku as he said, "I've got a better idea, how about I just eat you instead?" Gato's eyes widened as the original began walking towards him, but one of the Arcanine clones said, "Better not, boss. Who knows where that guy's been? I say we just roast them." The other Arcanine all nodded and the original said, "Very well, but first, Kabutops. Tell the others to launch a strike at the end of the bridge to cut them off and then to bring Tazuna and his family here. I think he will want to see this." The Kabutops clone nodded before being dispelled, while Gato and his thugs were wondering just what the pack leader was talking about while getting nervous. Kakashi in the meantime was wondering if Naruto was actually planning on going through with his plan. He got his answer as two Charizard flew overhead before launching flamethrowers behind the thugs, earning shouts of terror from them before the two large lizards came around and landed next to the Arcanine pack that had spread out, forming a line between the thugs and everyone else. As they landed, Gato tried to make a bid for his life and said, "Listen, what would it take for you to let me go? Money, women, I could give you land, or power." The original growled and said, "You have nothing that I could possibly want, Gato. You have done your absolute best to destroy this country to satisfy your own greed, and now it's time for you to pay the price." Kakashi stepped up to the line and said, "Naruto, don't do this. Let them face justice instead. Don't lower yourself to his level." The original looked over his shoulder to his sensei and said, "This would be justice, Kakashi-sensei. But I'll let Tazuna have final say. In fact, here he comes now." Kakashi nodded and stepped back and looked as the rest of the platoon of clones came with Tazuna and his family, as well as Sakura riding the larger fire types. As they dismounted, Sakura began looking around frantically and said, "Where's Sasuke?" The original glanced over at the Matang Dome and said, "Oh right, forgot about him. Alright guys, you can get off him now. I don't think Haku's going to be sticking him with any more needles anymore." Glancing over to the ice user, he said low enough for Sakura not to hear, "Shame." Haku chuckled as the Matangs all floated out of their position before taking up positions above the fire line where the platoon and Naruto's partners had joined the line and transformed into Flygons and began flying in place. Sakura meanwhile took one look at Sasuke's condition and screamed out, "Sasuke!" before looking to Haku and shouted out, "What did you do to him?" Haku shrugged and said, "We were fighting at the time, what did you expect would happen?" Meanwhile, as this was going on, Kakashi was explaining what was going on to Tazuna, asking him what he wanted done with Gato and the thugs. "So what do you want to do with them, Tazuna? Their fate is in your hands now," Kakashi said. Tazuna gained a hard look as he stared at the men and Gato in particular, who was looking extremely nervous, and said, "I would like nothing better than for them to suffer. But that would make me no better than them. We'll put them on trial and make sure they see justice." Kakashi nodded and was about to give Naruto orders, but Naruto showed that he didn't need them. Turning to Ivysaur, the original said, "Ivysaur, make them go to sleep for a while." Ivysaur nodded and walked forward to stand in front of the line before using its sleep powder attack, causing all of the thugs to fall to sleep. Gato's reign of terror was officially over. Kakashi sighed as he put out the fire at the end of the bridge with low-level water dragons before turning to see Naruto transformed as strange grass type that had a large tail that looked like it was made out of ferns and seeds growing out of its back, healing Zabuza's shoulders with his modified synthesis attack. As that was happening, Naruto's clones dropped their transformations and helped the villagers tie up Gato and his thugs and began carrying them off the bridge to warehouses where they would be held until they would be dealt with. Tazuna walked up and ran a critical eye over the bridge and sighed before saying, "Well, there was some damage done to the bridge due to the fire obviously, but thankfully, none of it is structural. With Naruto's clones helping us, we can make repairs easily and still finish right on schedule in a couple of weeks like planned." Kakashi nodded and said, "That's good to hear." Both turned as they saw an untransformed Naruto and a fully healed Zabuza who was moving his shoulders around as the two walked towards them. "You sure got lucky with this one, Kakashi. Shadow clones, ability to transform into virtually anything he wants, and a medic to boot. In a few years I just might have to pay the Leaf to send him to come give me a hand with a few things once I get everything ready," Zabuza said. Kakashi chuckled good-naturally and said, "I'll tell Lord Hokage to expect a mission request from you in the future in my report then." He then turned serious as he said, "So what are your plans for now?" Zabuza rose a hand to his chin and rubbed it before saying, Well for starters, I'm thinking of grabbing what Gato owes me from that place he owns on this island, maybe a little bit extra if you know what I mean. You're welcome to join me. After that, I think it's best if Haku and I make tracks as soon as possible. It's best if we don't stay around in one spot for too long." Kakashi and the others nodded before Zabuza called Haku over and the two Junin and the ice user took off to where Gato's mansion was. Scene changed to Zuna's bridge 2 weeks later. Team 7 was standing in front of Tazuna's family and the rest of the village as they said their final goodbyes. "Thanks again for everything you did. Especially you, Naruto. You have no idea exactly how much a difference your clones made in getting the bridge done as fast as you did. Naruto smiled and nodded while Sasuke fumed at how Naruto was once again getting praise. Damn it, it's always the dead last. I was so close to getting my Sharingan on the bridge back there during that fight, I'm sure of it, and then he steps in and ruins it. And now he gets all the praise. I should be the one being congratulated, not him. Naruto was currently ignoring the glare that Sasuke was giving him while Kakashi was mentally frowning. Sakura of course was daydreaming about her Sasuke. Naruto glanced over to Inari and said, "Remember what I told you, all right, Inari?" The boy nodded and said, "I'll try, Naruto." Naruto smiled and said, "That's all I ask." "Well now, I guess we better get going then," Kakashi said as he turned to start walking. "Actually, Kakashi-sensei, I think I can get us home a bit faster than if we walk home," Naruto said, grinning sheepishly as he rubbed the back of his head. "Oh, and how's that, Naruto?" Kakashi asked as he turned to look at the blonde, beginning to have a bad feeling on the inside. Naruto was still rubbing the back of his head as he said, "Well, you see, while my clones had been working on the bridge, I figured out how to use another skill that psychic types used called teleport. If they were ever at a location before, they could instantly teleport there. I had thought it would be a good thing to learn so that way we could get home quicker once we finish our missions." Kakashi rose an eyebrow and thought, "That's certainly useful." He then sighed and said, "I really wish you would tell me when you learn these things, Naruto." "Alright, go ahead, just make sure we end up at the main gates of the village and not somewhere else." Naruto grinned, not noticing the glare that Sasuke was giving him before he made a hand sign and transformed into an alakazam. "Right, now then, everyone put a hand on unless you want to walk home," the transformed blonde said, and the other three quickly did as instructed before Naruto closed his eyes and focused on picturing the main gates of the village hidden in the leaves. Specifically, the spot right in front of the sign-in booth. Then he just let the Alakazam's natural psychic powers go to work as he called out, "Teleport." Team 7 was covered in a blue light before they vanished without a trace, drawing sounds of amazement from everyone else. "That was amazing." One villager breathed out, earning murmurs of agreement from the others before they all shook themselves out of their shock, and one asked Tazuna, "Hey Tazuna, what are you going to name the bridge?" Tazuna grinned and said, "I'm glad you asked. I put a lot of thought into it, and only one name seems to fit considering all he's done for us. The Great Naruto Bridge." Scene change: Hidden Leaf Village main gates. It was another boring day for Izumo and Kotetsu as they had guard duty as they laid down at the sign-in booth with their heads on their hands, just staring out at nothing in particular. That is until three members of Team 7 and some weird 4'11" brown bipedal fox-like creature holding 2 spoons appeared in a flash of blue light right in front of their faces, causing both Chunnin's eyes to widen as they both fell backwards. Gah! Thump! Crash! Sakura and Sasuke both sweat dropped at the two Chunin who were shakily standing up, while Naruto burst out laughing, dropping the transformation, unable to keep it under proper control as he fell down laughing while holding his stomach. Kakashi merely rose an eyebrow at the two Chunin who were still trying to get their breathing under control from suddenly having a Genin team and their Junin sensei suddenly appear right in front of them right out of the blue like that. Quite literally in this case too. Hatake Kakashi and Genin Team 7 retuning from C-rank mission to Land of Waves. "Alright, just sign in and head on through," Kotetsu said, eyeing Naruto warily, knowing that the blonde was somehow responsible for all of this but having no clue whatsoever how. Said blonde was still lightly chuckling to himself as he and Kakashi walked into the mission briefing room so Kakashi could give his report. God, he wish he had a camera so he could have taken a picture of their faces at the time. "Ah, Kakashi, welcome back. I take it your mission was successful?" Sarutobi asked as he and Iruka spotted the two coming in after the Junin in front of them left the mission desk. Kakashi nodded and said, "Yes. In more ways than one, although there were a few complications as well." Chunin and Hokage both rose an eyebrow and Sarutobi said, "Please explain." Kakashi nodded again and said, "Of course. As you know, our mission was to escort Tazuna home to the Land of Waves until he finished his bridge." An hour later Kakashi was done giving his report and Sarutobi was studying Naruto intently. "So let me get this straight, Naruto. As long as you have been to a place, you can turn into one of these psychic types and use this teleport and go there instantly. Naruto nodded and Sarutobi sighed as he massaged his forehead and said, the council is going to have a field day when they hear of this. It sounds exactly like the fourth Hokage's Hiroshin Jutsu. Naruto shook his head and said, at first glance maybe. But it's not a battle technique, it's a traveling one. It was actually used by Abras and other wild Pokemon that could use it to escape battle. There is no way to use it multiple times quick enough to use it effectively in battle anyway, since it takes at least a second or two to activate. Now the extreme speed attack, that is one that could possibly be compared to the Hiroshin, even if it's slightly. Although I'm nowhere near ready to learn how to perform anything on that level yet. Sarutobi nodded and said, I see. Well, regardless, congratulations on finally learning on how to perform Pokemon attacks and good luck on learning the rest in a timely manner. The same goes to your partners evolving. Now then, your payment for the mission will be in your accounts by tomorrow. Kakashi, give your team the next few days off, I think they've earned it, don't you? Of course Lord Hokage, Kakashi said as the two shinobi bowed at the dismissal and left the room, leaving the old man with a bit to think about until the next shinobi came in with her report. Time skip. 1 month later, Naruto's apartment. Author's notes. In the time between Wave and the Chunin exams, the council had Kakashi help Sasuke unlock his Sharingan. Naruto woke up and stretched in his bed and smiled at his partners who were all curled up next to him. It had been interesting seeing the furniture store owner's reactions when he asked if he could get his sheets with fireproof seals for the then Charmander to sleep with him. But when he had showed his partners, the man had agreed it would be necessary. Now the four were sleeping in an even bigger bed from the same store that could hold all four. Naruto was kind of scared about going back when his partners evolved again, but Sarutobi had told him that he would help cover the cost for a new bed when the time came, when Naruto had confided with his grandfather figure a couple of weeks ago. After watching his partners sleep for a couple of more minutes, Naruto said, "All right guys, time to get up." The three Pokemon all yawned and began stretching like cats before all four began their daily routines. Scene change. Hidden Leaf Village streets 1 hour later. Naruto was making his way to the bridge where Team 7 would usually meet up for missions when he sensed a familiar presence and looked back and spotted a mop of pink hair running to catch up to him. "Naruto, wait up," Sakura shouted before she caught up to the blonde and slowed down to match paces with her blonde teammate who hadn't changed pace at all. After a moment of silence she asked, "So do you think we'll get another C rank today?" Naruto shrugged before stopping and said, "You know Konohamaru, rocks normally aren't square." Sakura looked at him like he was crazy but turned around as he did just in time to see a painted cardboard box that was behind them blow up in smoke. The smoke blew away, revealing 3 kids who were coughing from all the smoke as one of the kids said, "I think we used too much gunpowder, Konohamaru." Naruto shook his head and said, "That's not the only thing you guys did wrong. First of all, like I said, rocks aren't square. Second, they don't move. If you're going to be following a moving target, use better camouflage. Now then Konohamaru, who are your friends?" The third's grandson smiled and said, "These are Undan and Moegi. And together, we're the Konohamaru Corps." Naruto smirked and said, "So what are you 3 up to?" Moegi put her hands together and said, "Naruto, will you play ninja with us please?" Sakura rose an eyebrow and said, "A ninja playing ninja? Are you kidding?" Konohamaru and the other 2 finally noticed Sakura and he said, "Hey boss, who's this chick?" "Your girlfriend." Naruto and Sakura's eyes widened and Naruto said, "What, are you insane?" Sakura was a bit more vocal. "Why would I go out with this idiot when I could go out with Sasuke?" Konohamaru looked at her funny and said, "Sasuke." Turning to Naruto, he said, "Isn't he that prince of emos that's on your team that you were telling me about?" Naruto's eyes widened as Sakura's own narrowed dangerously before he said, "Run guys." "What? Why?" Konohamaru asked before seeing a dark aura surround the kunoichi, and the 4 took off running with Naruto keeping himself in between his teammate and the 4 academy students. Now some of you may be wondering why Naruto was running from his teammate when he could easily just transform into a Pokemon and beat her senseless right. Well, the answer is simple. When Sakura gets angry enough, she gets stronger than Tsunade herself, and right now she was downright pissed. Naruto, you get back here and take your punishment like a man. See what I mean? The three academy students turned around a corner and Naruto was right behind them when Konohamaru suddenly slammed into an older teen who was wearing a black cat suit with a mummified figure with a brown mop of hair sticking out and fell backwards. Undan and Moegi were slightly behind Konohamaru and so were able to stop before running into the boy and the blonde girl with a large fan on her back who was next to him while Naruto skid to a stop behind them. Sakura meanwhile came around the corner and was about to say something before stopping as well when she saw what was happening. Ow! That hurt you, brat, the boy said as he grabbed Konohamaru by his shirt collar and hoisted him up. Kenkoru, stop making a scene, the girl said. Don't worry Tamari, I'm just going to teach this boy a lesson. The boy said. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Now put him down, Naruto said with a dangerous tone in his voice as he began walking past the other two academy students towards the two older teens who he noticed both had the logo for the Sand Village on their headbands. Sand Shinobi then. Wonder what they're doing here. Sensei was probably bringing political documents for the Hokage. Still gives them no right to pick on Konohamaru though, Naruto thought. The boy holding Konohamaru sneered and said, oh yeah, and what are you going to do to stop me, brat? Naruto smirked before making a hand sign and said, transform. The resulting smoke cloud put both Sand Shinobi on edge, but nothing prepared them for the brown blur that rushed out or the foot that slammed into the older teen's chest sending him flying as an arm grabbed Konohamaru keeping him from harm. The boy went flying for a good 10 feet before landing and skidding another 5 before stopping as everyone else got a look at what Naruto had turned into as he calmly put Konohamaru down. Naruto was currently a Hitmonlee, a 4'11" mostly brown figure with long legs that looked like they could do some serious damage. Naruto dropped the transformation before as Konohamaru said, wow boss, that was so cool. Naruto merely smirked and said, thanks Konohamaru. Hey Sasuke, you just going to lounge around up there all day? And don't think I don't know you're up there either, coon boy. I can smell the blood on you as well. Everyone's eyes widened as Naruto looked up at the tree that was beside the road towards the two figures while Sasuke began wondering how someone could sneak up on him without him noticing like that. The two sand ninja on the other hand. Gee Gaara, when did you get here? Kenkoru asked the redhead who was hanging upside down from the tree branch as he began getting up from where Naruto kicked him. Gaara shot him a dispassionate look and said, Kenkoru, you're a disgrace to our village. Shut up or I'll kill you. Kenkoru paled and instantly slammed his mouth shut as Naruto rose an eyebrow and thought, forget waking up on the wrong side of the bed. This guy looks like someone came in and threw his whole bed out the window with him still in it. Actually, it looks like he hasn't gotten any sleep for a month at least. He barely registered Sasuke hopping down towards him in an exaggerated manner trying to act like something special or Sakura glomping the Uchiha sign although when the redhead disappeared in a whirlwind of sand and reappeared in another beside the blonde girl his eyebrow shot right back up. Well that's certainly cool, Naruto muttered to himself earning a small nod from Konohamaru who was still by his side. The redhead studied the blonde that was standing across from him and said in a sandy voice that matched his apparent control over sand, what is your name? Sasuke walked forward arrogantly thinking that the redhead was talking to him and said, Sasuke Uchiha. Gaara's eyes flickered over to the Uchiha briefly before returning to Naruto and said, not you, him. Sasuke sneered and thought, it's always the dead last. Naruto rose an eyebrow and said, Naruto Uzumaki. Yours. Gaara of the desert, I apologize for my brother's behavior. It won't happen again. Naruto nodded and said, apology accepted. If you don't mind me asking though, what are you guys doing here? We're here for the Chunin exams. I'm Tamari by the way. The blonde-haired girl said. Naruto rose an eyebrow again and said, Chunin exams. I thought those weren't for another month. Huh, well good luck then. Tamari nodded before Gaara said, Kenkoru, Tamari, we are leaving. I look forward to seeing you again Naruto Uzumaki. Likewise Gaara, Naruto said as he watched the three sand shinobi turn and walk down the street. Turning to Konohamaru and his friends he said, do me a favor and keep your head down for the next few months Konohamaru. With foreign shinobi in the village you never know what could happen if a prank goes wrong. Right boss, Konohamaru said before the three kids took off running the other way, leaving Naruto chuckling before Sasuke hmphed and began walking towards Team 7's meeting spot with Sakura right on his heels. Naruto shook his head before he said, seemingly to no one, "It just had to be one of those days, huh guys?" On his belt, his 3 Pokeballs vibrated in agreement as he began walking after his teammates. Scene change. Team 7 meeting spot. Team 7 was currently waiting at a bridge that spanned across a channel, waiting for their sensei so that they could missions like they usually did, doing like they usually did while they waited. Meaning that Sasuke was being the prince of emos as he brooded while Sakura tried to get a date, while Naruto flipped through his Pokédex as he carried on a conversation with his partners who were relaxing around him. A poof of smoke on one of the arches at the end of the bridge drew all 6 of their attention as Kakashi appeared in a crouch. "Yo," Kakashi said with his customary eye smile and wave of his hand. "You're late," Sakura screamed out, causing everyone to wince, although they were pretty much used to it by now. Before Kakashi could spout some excuse though, Naruto said, "Junin meeting discussing the Chunin exams, I take it, Kakashi-sensei." Sakura and Sasuke looked at Naruto like he was crazy while Kakashi merely rose an eyebrow. "That's right, Naruto. May I ask how you knew?" Naruto shrugged and said, "We ran into a genin team from the hidden sand village that was here for them. You can't always be late because you got lost on the road of life, so it wasn't much a stretch." Kakashi chuckled and said, "Fair enough," before taking out 3 pieces of paper and tossed them to his students before saying, continuing, "As it happens, I actually nominated you 3, my bad, 6 to take those exams. If you think that you're up to the challenge, report to room 301 at the academy tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Well, that's all, see ya." And with that, he disappeared in a blur of speed, leaving Naruto shaking his head as he said, "Typical. Making us wait for hours only to leave 2 minutes later. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely going to take this thing. Right guys?" He said this last thing to his partners, who nodded with determined looks in their eyes. Sasuke smirked and said, "You know, dead last, for once I agree with you. You up for this, Sakura?" Sakura bit her lip for a minute but nodded and said, "If you think we're ready, then so do I." Scene change. Naruto's training grounds, Hokage Monument. 1 hour later. Naruto and his partners were currently tearing through targets as Naruto's clones replaced targets. Naruto and a shadow clone were currently transformed as a Charmeleon and Wartortle, shooting out flamethrowers and water guns alongside his partners. Safely off to the side, the Konohamaru Corps was watching in awe as barrages of leaves and streams of water and fire tore through the flying discs. The original suddenly stopped shooting flamethrowers for a moment as a scent passed through his nose, causing the others to stop as well. As Wartortle asked him what was wrong, Naruto turned his head to the tree where he smelled the hidden person and said, "All right, I know you're there. So come out before I burn you out." A ninja that looked to be about as old as Kakashi and Iruka, wearing a straw hat with a metal plate on it that bore the 4 lines of the hidden rain village on it, stepped out from behind the tree. Held loosely in his hand was a chain that had a ball weight in his hand. The man chuckled and said, "I saw you and your teammates get your entry forms for the Chunin exams. Do you really think you have what it takes to become Chunin?" "Ha, don't make me laugh. Oh well, I might as well get rid of the competition now than later." Naruto and his partners as well as his clone frowned before Naruto said, "Guys, keep Konohamaru and his friends safe. I'll deal with this clown. You too, Wartortle." His partners and clone nodded before rushing over to the 3 kids and took defensive positions, while the original took a more offensive one and took a deep breath through his nose and grinned as he finally recognized what he was smelling. "Looks like he wants to test me. Understandable, considering he taught me and the others for a good 4 years. So no barbecuing. Oh well, old school it is then. You know," Naruto said, "normally I'd just roast you and be done with it. But considering you're from the Rain Village, you'd probably just use some water jutsu against me, so why don't we go with something different, eh? Transform." The usual smoke cloud surrounded the blonde, putting the Rain Ninja on guard. When it cleared, Naruto was standing at 3'11" and had fur that was a combination of blue, black, and yellow. There were pointed ears at the top of his head and a pointed muzzle, but what really got everyone's attention were the spikes that were in the Pokemon's hands and chest. Seeing the widened eyes, Naruto smirked and said, allow me to introduce you to Lucario, a fighting, steel-type hybrid. Now then, let's get started. The Lucario seemed to disappear before the rain and suddenly went flying with the Lucario reappearing in its place, a blue aura surrounding it with its eyes closed and flaps behind its head raised. Scene change. Leaf Marketplace. Kakashi was standing on top of a roof over the deserted marketplace looking down on it when Iruka landed next to him rubbing his jaw. So, how did it go? The Scarecrow asked. Well, you were right. They all did quite well. I think Naruto knew it was me though. When I first showed up he was doing some kind of fire attack with his partners. But when we fought, he switched to a fighting type. Didn't stop him from kicking my ass though with those aura techniques of his. I'm going to be sore for a month I tell you. Kakashi chuckled and said, I hear you. I remember the first time I fought him when he sparred with me as a Lucario. He actually managed to put me in the hospital with a broken arm. And that was before he could use that aura they used. Those things must have been truly something to have seen in a fight when they were still around. Yeah, I bet. I'm just glad he went easy on me. If the judges don't make him Chunin in a month based off of his fighting skills, then they're insane. Iruka said. Kakashi smirked and said, agreed. Good night Iruka. Scene change. Academy entrance. Naruto walked up to the entrance of the academy with his partners safely in their Pokeballs and nodded to his teammates as the three began walking into the building. It was time to take the next step in their ninja careers. Thanks.